Hey gang, welcome to Ozone Late Night. This is part 2 of the John Carpenter retrospective that Dr. Doug Bielmeyer and I are doing. And in this episode, if you missed the last one, you should go back and listen to it. We did Assault on Precinct 13 and Escape from New York. And in this episode, we are tackling a pair of strange but fascinating John Carpenter films. We are looking at 1982's Halloween 3 and 1984's Starman. Yeah, two really, really different films that are unique within John Carpenter's catalog. So here we go. Enjoy. Everybody, we are back for our second part in our John Carpenter retrospective, which is what I am now officially calling it. And I have a little opening tale of part one.
Part one.
I have complained many times on my show about YouTube.
Yes.
And today was truly a day of infamy in using YouTube. So what I did is I took our last show and I did a whole video to it, which is about 3 hours long.
Wow.
And
it was long.
It was long.
Yeah.
And I spent hours.
Long play.
Hours of coordinating where the video clips were, lining things up, making sure it all faded, got background images, all kinds of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got it all done. Amazingly, Premiere Pro did not screw me in the edit, which is a rare blessing.
Which is amazing. That's a feat in itself. Yeah.
It was. Finally got it done, exported, and uploaded it the morning of this recording. And I went,
Sounds
okay,
good.
It's going to take a little while, so let me go and get my coffee. I've got my stuff going. I come back.
Maybe a bagel.
A couple bagels. I love bagels.
Couple
bagels. Yeah, except for my calorie count is going to blow through the roof.
Right. I was going to say, watch the carbs.
Watch the carbs. I'm trying.
Live your life, but
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something. It became a McDonald's day later because I come back and YouTube says blocked, copyright, and I'm like, oh man. And I mean blocked meaning nobody can see it. Now. Yes. So I look at it, and it's all the Escape from New York stuff. I mean, all blocked. Mm-hmm. And Assault on Precinct 13, no problems. I guess nobody cares about that movie. No, nothing. It said, that theme song, that's John Carpenter, but you can go ahead and play. It's one of those things where it's like, we're blocked it, but you're not monetizing, so who cares? Because I don't monetize the channel. And so I'm like, Jesus. So then I had to re-edit the whole back half of it, right? And
that's
honestly,
amazing though that you stuck with it and you edited the back half.
Because I put all this work in.
That's dedication. That's dedication.
Yeah, well, I don't do a lot of video editing. I admit I'm mostly an audio guy because I'm lazy. So I stick with audio because it's easy and I can just talk and not care. But the thing that really pisses me off about it, it's not if the channel was monetized, if I had played the whole movie, if I had said, hey, I'll sell you my bootleg copy of Escape from New York where I'm telling you all about blah, 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 I would understand why it would be outright blocked. But I mean, I counted, I think it's 8 minutes of total footage chopped up all over the place.
Right.
At points, and it blocks that. And what really we would be doing is selling the movie. Honestly, you wouldn't listen to that and be like, oh, I'm not watching this. You'd be like, wow, I want to watch these two movies back to back. It's
right. And they would pair well and they relate to each other. And yeah.
So, but you have, I sent you the real copy. So you have the one where you can actually see everything. And anybody who wants that one, I will send it to you. Just feel free to drop an email and I will send it to you because whatever, YouTube, screw you.
Yeah. Well, it's funny about that. The first film. So the first film, I'm trying to recall here, it was 1970, what was the
76. Yep, 76.
So it was right at when the copyright laws went into place.
Oh,
so I wonder if Precinct is just prior to that
you could be right.
And so it's not under copyright, where, of course, Escape from New York would be in, was it 1981 or 82?
81, yeah.
81. Yeah.
Wow.
That could be
exactly
could be the reason. It could just be, obviously one's a very, very popular movie, and the other one is the awesome Assault on Precinct 13.
Yeah, 1976 was the Copyright Act where they actually revised it to make it. Wow. So that's probably exactly what it is. That's amazing.
Yep.
Well, anyway, it was worth doing. I don't care. I still had a great time.
Absolutely.
It just really irritated me that they screwed me at the very end like that. But whatever.
But your listeners should definitely applaud you and appreciate you for going back and redoing it and finishing it. I feel like other people would just be like, you know what? We'll do half the video, or we'll do no video. So, kudos to you. Kudos to you.
Well, I'm actually just very glad the assault part didn't get touched, because that's the one that I think relied more on some of my visual stuff.
Yeah.
Where where there were more looks involved. So at least they left that part alone. Now I assume that this one, I'm going to do the same thing with all these. So they will all have videos. This will probably get screwed, to hell and back. But maybe nobody will care about our first film, but definitely the second one, I'm sure. So
definitely
moving right along from my whining at the opening, let's get to the first of our features for the second part here. Now, when I teased this in the first part, I had said that these are kind of the anomalies, the inverse type movies, the oddballs.
Yeah.
And specifically, I don't think we have to make it a secret for the whole episode. So the two movies we're discussing for this one are 1982's Halloween 3: Season of the Witch and 1984's Starman. Now, before anybody starts screaming at their speakers and or YouTube screen, I know that Halloween 3 is not directed by John Carpenter. But I consider it a John Carpenter film. Therefore, we are including it because it is a rare case where he didn't direct but did do the music. Right. Starman is the opposite, where he directs but doesn't do the music. So I felt like these were kind of a natural two to put together.
And he's producing Season of the Witch, and it's the same cinematographer that and the same sort of family of people that work on these films. So he's not the director, but he had a big part of it, and his team had a big part of it.
Yes, and many of the shots that when you see it look like classic Carpenter type shots. There's actually sequences that feel like they are echoes of earlier movies. So I have no problem. And there's a lot of his stable of actors come back in various different roles. So
Absolutely.
Now the story of Halloween 3 might be one of the more fascinating bits about it. So what happened was John Carpenter also did not direct the second Halloween, but he did write it. He and Deborah Hill were part of writing it. But he has said many times that he really didn't know what the point of a sequel to Halloween was, that there really wasn't any more story to tell, which is part of the reason why it's generally not well regarded, and it is kind of a very disposable sequel. And to my mind, indicates that people didn't get the point of the first movie, which was you weren't supposed to have Michael Myers come back, but of course they did.
Yeah. About 15 more times.
Sadly, the lesson was not learned ever.
Not learned. Yeah.
So
just real quick on that too.
Sure,
don't you feel like too, like Halloween 1 versus Halloween 2 were very different movies? Like they were almost in a different genre of horror,
like absolutely. No doubt about it.
Yeah. And it's kind of like that with the Alien movies, right? Where the first Alien is kind of more of a, science fiction horror, and then the Cameron Aliens, is a different type of movie. Good or bad. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's almost like the second film it was more of like a slasher film, like a Friday the 13th. Like it felt more in that vibe than the first movie did, which was much more of a kind of slow burning sort of thriller, with one of the probably most memorable soundtracks. I don't know, in the 20th century, probably.
No, I completely agree. I think it is very clear that Halloween 2 is a very soulless project, that it's not one that really the people making it really believe is necessary. Not that I think, it's a bad movie. It's just extraordinarily unnecessary. and I think that's clear all the way through. And I think people, I would be very curious what people, and of course we can't time travel or anything like that, but I would be curious if people at the time who went to see it in the back of their minds were kind of wondering if there was really a point to it. Because I think one of the great things about the first movie is the whole thing of him just leaving and there is no resolution is the point. You're not supposed to see more of him. That's the idea, is that this malevolent thing can just be anywhere, anybody, anytime. No face, no name. I mean, Michael Myers, but no association, anything, just evil. The idea of just pure evil. So I you know.
And so you'll probably get to it here. We're moving towards it, but when we get to the third installment now, we're expecting to see Michael Myers, right? Like you said, could we travel back in time? Could you imagine being in the theater, sitting down to watch Halloween 3? I mean, at what point would you say to yourself, like at what point, like minute 1, minute 5, at what point would you say to yourself, where's Michael Myers?
Well, I think you would probably know it almost immediately, just because it's not set in the same place. There's no recurring characters. Nobody's coming back. The theme is different. I mean, everything about it, I think, is immediately telegraphing that there. I mean, the fact that he's not in the poster, although I think Halloween 3 has a absolutely sensational poster, that distorted witch face is just amazing. But so a little bit of DNA to it, though, just because specifically he isn't in it, is when Carpenter and Deborah Hill were approached to make another sequel, they specifically said the only way we'll be involved at all is if we don't have Michael Myers. The idea here is because, again, Carpenter had said that even in 2, he was out of ideas. That's one of the reasons that suddenly Michael Myers was related to Laurie Strode, which they have since thrown out. Yeah. Because he said that I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. He's basically said at one point, I think, some quote along the lines of, I was getting drunk because I had nothing to say in this movie and I couldn't figure out how else to write it. And it seems kind of evident that way. So, I think some of that, the Rocky Mountain Coors Light was coming through on that, or whatever it is.
The mountains were blue. Yeah, head for the mountains.
Whatever he uses in between his cigarettes to kind of pass the time was, it was coming through in there. So
I think it's just rage, or what did we say? Cynicism. I think.
Boy, if this movie doesn't come across as cynical, I don't know what does, man. Holy crap. Yeah. But so basically the idea was, okay, we can keep making these Halloween films, but let's make them into an anthology series. Let's make it a different idea under the only linking factor will be Halloween time.
Halloween, which I love. I love that idea. And it reminds me of a series. It was a few years ago. I think it was on Hulu, and it was a series where, everything was related. I don't think it was by Halloween. I'm forgetting but it was a bunch of, you have a lot of these like Tales from the Crypt and all these other
like
things.
American Horror Story? That one?
American Horror Story. That's another one. Yeah. Where, it's some of the same actors, some of the same situations, but largely it's different place, different time, but still sort of, on the same theme.
Yeah, I mean, there's Black Mirror. There's all these different series that have come around and basically said, okay, like with Black Mirror, the idea is the cynical technology really is what that is. Yeah. But that's the really linking element. Otherwise, there's really nothing to it. But I agree. What a wonderful idea. And if it was floated today, it probably could be done as a streaming series. But of course, this is far before any of that. When they just wanted you to crank out reboot, remake, sequelitis is not really all that new. It's been around for a while, sadly.
Well, wasn't there only like 3 channels still on any given TV at this point? I mean, was there really
82? Probably. Yeah, I don't know when HBO came around, but that would be the
maybe like 13 stations. Yeah.
I guess you would have local. Yeah, so you would have your local ones and your public access. Oh, do I lament the passing of public access when you would turn on a TV at 2 a.m. and some lunatic who probably was off his meds for at least a month was just reading Hamlet while nude and wearing an empty mayonnaise jar as a loincloth.
But followed by Bob Ross, though, painting a beautiful, pretty little tree,
Yeah.
So
or followed by a serious discussion between 2 intellectuals on whether Watergate, had permeated the society permanently. right after, you know, Bobby's mayonnaise hour of fun in Hamlet.
Bobby's mayonnaise hour. I mean, that was, you know, that was on-demand TV. You know, definitely that was must watch.
Well, I spent $500 for a set of VHS tapes of it a couple of years ago, so clearly I value it every bit as much as it should be valued.
I have it on Laserdisc, so...
Ooh, Laserdisc, that's great, because not only can you watch it, but then if somebody tells you to keep it down, you can throw it at them, Kung Lao style, and cut their heads off like a hat.
Well, that's the whole point. Yeah, that was the popularity of Laserdisc in a nutshell.
Oh,
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's just, it's home defense. It's before there was a taser, you had, Laserdisc. So... back to Halloween 3, eventually. So basically it was pitched by Carpenter and Hill as, okay, we're going to do an anthology series. And Carpenter, who was a fan of the Quatermass stories, wanted to do something that was not necessarily pure horror, but to do more of a science fiction kind of a... there was a quote from him where he said... There was something about, here it is. He wanted this movie to be Deborah Hill said that she wanted the movie to be a, quote, pod movie, not a knife movie, meaning not a slasher film, but more of a Invasion of the Body Snatchers type.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like the film, so it's saying it's a science fiction horror film. And I feel that because I think there are elements of horror, but there also is that kind of, we're being invaded from a outside force, or there's the kind of cult aspect to it. Yeah.
Almost a reclamation of modern life by kind of pagan elements that used to be more, almost the idea of aliens were here, they left, they came back, but in this case it's cult and pagan, religions coming back, which I listen, I have loved this movie for way longer than most people have. Now it has become a, we've discovered this is good. No kidding. It always was good. It's just that I think you're right. There was a huge amount of bitterness over the fact that this was not a Michael Myers movie. A lot of people, I think, thought it was a bait and switch, which I kind of get by the fact they put a 3 in the title. That was probably the worst idea, was to put a 3 there instead of having Halloween, Season of the Witch, whatever. You had asked about the title, I think, before we started recording.
Right. So I couldn't derive really any meaning from the movie, anything that I saw in the movie. Like, at no point they were like, and the Season of the Witch, you're just like, that's the title. Like they didn't do that. Not that they did that in Assault on Precinct 13. I mean, they did mention the precinct several times. So you knew what was going on, but you're saying it was a throwback to
it is a Romero reference. Well, yes, Romero made a movie called Season of the Witch, and in that movie, which it's not really a horror movie, not a classic Romero type film, but in the movie, a woman realizes that she has encountered a witch. So there is kind of a similarity where it's ordinary people are discovering this huge, magic, pagan, whatever, because Stonehenge, depending on how you look at it, there is magic, I think, in the movie, you could say. Magic venued through technology. And so, that was a Romero reference because he has put Romero references throughout almost everything he's done. That is what, I mean, I didn't see any direct quote of him saying it, but it doesn't seem accidental that there are some thematic ties to it and another movie with the same title. Because like you said, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Why would you say, see, there is a witch mask, and the witch is featured on the cover, which is beautiful, but otherwise it doesn't really make sense.
And I think it had, like, if we're really stretching here, I think at some point, in the movie they talk about the traditions and sort of the harvest season and sort of, when they would, I don't want to give away anything that we're about to talk about, but just this like kind of that there was sort of this older way of living, this kind of pagan older way that there was a season for the type of debauchery that goes on in the film. As you get about maybe halfway through, you start to unravel the kind of horrifying plot that is unfolding.
Yeah, so let's lay out the particulars of the movie, and then we'll dive into it. So, do you have the budget numbers and everything like you did last time? You want to run through
Absolutely. That? Yeah. So, this is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. It is a 1982 American, it's saying here, science fiction horror film. and is the third installment in the Halloween film series, which I feel like that could be contested. We were talking about this is not actually directed by John Carpenter, but it is the first film to be written and directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, the creators of Halloween, and as you mentioned, Halloween 2, they returned as the producers. So it says Halloween 3 is the only entry in the series that does not feature the series antagonist, Michael Myers. After the filming's disappointing reception and box office performance, Michael Myers, sure enough, was brought back 6 years later in Halloween 4, quote unquote, the return of Michael Myers. I feel like, so by the way, we said, how did you feel in 1982 if you were a young man going to the movie theater to see Michael Myers slash some people up and he was not there? I feel like you would be pretty upset. I might ask for my money back. Or free milk duds. But
well, that's why I say putting a 3 in there, bad idea. That was dooming it to failure almost from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So, the film departs, as they're saying here, from the sort of slasher genre of the other installments, instead featuring, like you mentioned, a witchcraft theme within a science fiction aspects. It wasn't just pure witchcraft. There was some technology, and there's some really great scenes later in the movie that are very Carpenter-esque. So like you said, Carpenter and Hill believed that this could be an anthology series that's centered around Halloween night. So as far as budget, it was on budget at a whopping $4.6 million. So, and it made a profit of about $14.4 million. So, in the U.S. box office, this was in 1982. So we talked about Assault on Precinct 13, right? That was a $100,000 movie, which just sounds amazing. So this was a little bit, it was still a lower budget film, but at 4.6 million and grossing 14.4, it was still a success. And like you said, it has established a reputation as a standalone cult film.
Yeah, the fact that it basically tripled plus a little bit its budget. Mm-hmm. You could negative reviews or not, which the reviews, yep. Although I find one negative review to be hilarious because 3 of the 4 negative points the review mentions, I actually think are not positives, but I don't have a problem with. Yeah. So I want to read
that's the best part. That's the best part.
Well, I don't want to say the best part necessarily, but I do want to read this one. Here we go. This is a quote from the New York Times reviewer Vincent Canby, and his review is interesting because it is a 50-50 review, honestly. So he says, quote, Halloween 3 manages the not easy feat of being anti-children, anti-capitalism, anti-television, and anti-Irish all at the same time, end quote. In the same review, however, he says, quote, it's probably as good as any cheerful ghoul could ask for, end quote. So to me, I'm sitting here going, okay, wait a minute. So you're basically saying the movie isn't that bad, you just don't like the messages. Well, that's something else. And, I don't have a problem with anti-capitalism and anti-television. I'm not anti-children, although I have said many times on my show, I admire any movie that kills a child because you have to be committed to kill a child or children. It's just not done all the time.
Well, and, that's something I wanted to talk about less in a sort of comedic way. But, yeah, like he time and time again has these scenes in the movies where we see children being mistreated or we see violence against children in his movies, and that is a really tough topic for a lot of people, but it's something that he uses, and he doesn't do it in all his films, but it's something he definitely uses to manipulate us. And I feel like, especially the way it's done in Assault on Precinct 13, it's kind of very shocking and sort of matter of fact. And there's a scene in this movie which I want to talk about when we get to it, that changed the movie for me. There's a scene in this movie where I went from having certain thoughts about the movie and kind of being like, well, maybe this is not, maybe I
made a mistake doing shows on Carpenter with this guy. What the hell am I watching?
Well, I was like, I made him watch Starman, so I made him rewatch Starman. So I was like, you can watch Halloween, finish it. And there's one scene, of course, in the movie that I don't think I've been able to shake since watching it. And I watched, like I said, I watched this over the summer, and it's intense. So.
Yeah, let's discuss the approach to the film. Now, I have loved this movie for a very long time. I remember seeing it when I was pretty young, and the scene you're talking about was very memorable, and just that I always thought the visuals and I generally, my interest in film is very science fiction and horror. That's generally where my interest lies. So the fact that this movie mixes those. And I found the antagonist to be a riveting character. Even when I was younger and didn't appreciate acting and everything else, I thought that the bad guy in this, who we'll get to, I thought he was so intense and interesting. And plus, he's been in a million things. He was in RoboCop, which I saw when I was far younger than I should have seen it, because, oh boy, that's a film.
Yes.
But you had not seen it prior to this watch. Have you ever seen this? I mean, you've probably seen it bits and pieces, but you've never watched it all the way through.
No, absolutely not. So I was so I didn't do really any research. I was just like, Joe told me to watch this movie for the show.
That's even better.
I'm like, let's do it. And I had watched recently, I think within the last few years, I started doing a Halloween. I'm going to watch all the Halloween movies. And I watched the first one and just had a great time. Watched the second one and I was just like really disappointed. And then something else caught my eye. So I would have naturally gone on to Halloween 3, but I didn't. So I came into this being like, all right, well, maybe this is going to be an adjusted version of Halloween 2. Like, maybe Donald Pleasance will return maybe they'll have some other twists that kept this franchise alive. So I started watching it, and I think the beginning, the opening is a fantastic opening with just this, in the first 10 minutes, the series of events that happen, and a sort of man setting himself on fire in a car. I mean, so I was just like, oh, okay, well, this is going in a different direction. But once again, the minutes started ticking by, and there was some character development, and there's some things happening, and I'm like, where the hell is Michael Myers? So at some point, I realized, I'm like, Michael Myers is not showing up to this movie. And like I said, I got about halfway through the movie, and I was like, I told Joe I'd do this, so I'm a man of my word, and I will continue watching this. But if I hadn't made that promise, I may have stopped watching it, and I'm glad I didn't. Because then the movie takes yet another turn. It takes many turns, but like I said, there were some scenes that just really shocked me, and then it put everything else I had seen before and then everything after in the movie into this other perspective. So I thought that was good. I the whole thing is don't underestimate John Carpenter. Don't. Like, you watch the movie and you're like, this is kind of silly, or like this seems a little, B movie-ish. Oh, the budget's really low. Don't underestimate him, because he knows how to put a whole film together, and he knows how to tell a story.
That is hysterical of how long it took you to realize that, because it's like you said, I saw this when I was very young, so I don't think at that point I had the mindset of, oh, Michael Myers will have to come back. I think at that point I wasn't, you don't really think like that as a kid. You're just watching whatever it is. Or maybe I didn't really pick up on it being Halloween 3 in the series, because it is so different right from the beginning. Although there are many things that now, watching it as an adult, I said, oh, okay, yeah, that's a very Carpenter-esque thing. In fact, one of my notes is that the entire opening feels a lot like Assault on Precinct 13, where there's a guy running from somebody, runs into a place, collapses. Nobody knows what happened to him. Somebody's trying to help him. There's a lot of that Assault on Precinct 13 feel just in the opening. But we should talk about what I honestly think is one of my favorite Carpenter things. This has got to be in my top 3. I love this theme because it is so well put together to what the opening visuals are. And I just think it's a wildly great theme. So let's go ahead and play it. Now, I will describe, for those who don't see it. So if you've never seen Halloween 3, the opening, unlike a lot of Carpenter openings that are very spare with just the credits and there's not much else to them, you're just seeing credits. This opens with what look like TV scan lines, and it's this bright orange kind of cathode, old TV look. And basically it unfolds very similar to, where the first two movies were. What you end up seeing by the end of the theme is that this is a computer graphic version of a pumpkin with a jack-o'-lantern carved into it. So let me play this magnificent score and we can enjoy this. Here we go. Oh, let me set my volume correctly before I blow everybody's ears out. There we go. Okay, now let's enjoy this theme. I love this theme, but I'm going to let you go first on your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and right after that, we start to you can hear the arpeggiator coming in right at that moment, and that's when we kind of shift to like you said, kind of the opening scene, and there's this arpeggiator and there's this really high sort of cymbal kind of percussive element that he uses throughout as to kind of a way to build tension. So it's kind of interesting. Instead of like the bump bump, in this movie and like in The Fog, it's like there's a bump bump like every like, every like 30 seconds you'll just hear that, or even Prince of the Damned. Or not Prince of the Damned. I'm combining
Prince of Darkness. I got you.
Prince of Darkness, and actually also in Village of the Damned. Also, actually, no, I'll stick with Prince of the Damned because both of those movies have the bump bump in their soundtrack. So in this one, he's definitely exploring like using the higher cymbals and sort of these arpeggiators to sort of create that tension. But I love that opening theme because it doesn't really go anywhere. It builds a lot of tension, and all those like sort of repeating patterns that you're hearing, they hint at, we're going somewhere, we're heading somewhere. But, like you said, visually our perspective is being skewed, so we can't really see what we're looking at on these like sort of old cathode screens. And then eventually it's revealed to us what we're looking at. But I just love how that theme sort of evolves, and it does build tension, but it's not really going anywhere. And I think that's just a nice setup for the film, and then it's a great way to kind of segue to the sort of higher symbol kind of arpeggiator that we hear throughout a lot of moments in the film when somebody's sneaking around or, trying to evade the cult and other nefarious actors in this movie.
The thing that I really love about it, that was not intentionally meant to be a pun, but one of the things it reminds me of, I keep saying thing, is The Thing. There's a lot of and the movies came out the same year, so I feel like there is this was kind of in his mind, like this space of music and creating was there. But also, I love the fact that it really doesn't feel at all like the traditional Halloween theme, which is driving and pulsating, and you go into this movie, and it doesn't have that driving force, which I think is a positive to it. I think it doesn't lose anything for that, but it's also not just repeating the same type of thing or recurring the same type of thing.
I agree completely, but I think it's like, the dun 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 dun. So in the first Halloween theme, we have that repeating kind of piano line or whatever. And they're doing that here a little bit, but they're doing it with these synths, and they'll like only have it for like a bar or two, and then they'll stop. And then it'll start in a different pitch or higher or lower. So it's like they're kind of like alluding to that, like the real, driving sort of Halloween 1 theme, on piano. But it's never like coming to fruition. So I think like even right off the bat, they're just kind of being like, this is going to be in the vein of Halloween, but it's different. And I agree with the soundtrack from The Thing. It is very similar. I think the difference is it Marcone who does The Thing? So I think you have, in that film, you have a much more score-like, orchestration, and there's kind of more harmony, where I really some of the things I really love about the John Carpenter scores is that they're very rhythmic, and they're also just very sort of simple and straightforward, which adds this whole other element, I think, to what we're seeing on screen.
Yeah, and also it's got the element of this theme being contained to the opening specifically, even though parts of it come back. I do like the fact that it's almost like, okay, this is a self-contained movie. This is not supposed to be part of something. This is its own thing. It feels like that's all throughout the credits, is almost to, even if it's not obvious, clue you into, no, this is not just a continuation. This is not meant to be the first of now a new bunch of movies. This is its own thing, which like I said, I just adore this. I adore the whole opening. I think this whole opening is probably one of the better movie openings that I can think of. And so that leads into, as we mentioned, the opening where we see a man who's being pursued. We don't really see the people chasing him. They're in a car and he's running. And basically he finally ends up at a gas station where an individual, the gas attendant, who, as I have in my notes, is having the worst couple of weeks of his life because he keeps getting involved in stuff he wants nothing to do with. But he ends up collapsing there. And right before he does, we get a little bit of background exposition on something that will come up much later, but we get a little news report, which I've pulled a snippet from just to kind of set the stage of again, an element that we're obviously meant to know about, but we won't come back to for quite a while. So I'll play that little snippet right here.
Leaving British authorities still baffled and without any substantial clues 9 months after the theft. The blue stone was one of 19, believed to represent the 19-year cycle of the moon. It weighs more than 5 tons, making its disappearance a mystery indeed. Derek Smith at Stonehenge.
Right, so in the background we get a very clear, okay, there's been some theft at Stonehenge. This giant stone has been absconded with, and of course, if you know anything about movies, that means at some point that will factor into something here, unless it's one of these types of movies that's just full of misdirects, but that's not this type of film. So this individual shows up, collapses, and is brought to the hospital of Dr. Daniel Chalice, who is played by a Carpenter regular. Tom Atkins, who also not a Carpenter film, but may have one of the best lines in comedy horror ever, which is, of course, in Night of the Creeps. Well, he says, "Girls, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is your dates are here. The bad news is they're dead." And that, what a great line. I love Night of the Creeps. We're not going to get into that, but it's a great movie as well.
Yeah.
And so Dr. Chalice tries to help this man, and, he is basically a hard drinking doctor, which is always what you want at your local hospital. And so he goes to sleep off whatever. Well, we find out later his ex-wife, who is the actress who played Julie from Assault on Precinct 13, is constantly on the phone. Just I don't know if Carpenter was going through something, but this is probably one of the worst hell ex-wife portrayals in any film, where she just is constantly, you want to kill her. You just,
definitely like the misogyny meter in this film, especially I think at one point too, he slaps the nurse on the butt at one point, or they're like flirting or something like that. So there is, I think right off the bat, you're a little bit like, okay, this is a little bit different voice than maybe, some of the strong female characters that you saw in Assault and in Escape from New York. It has a little bit different vibe, but I'm not sure of the year, but I know he was going through a divorce around this time to Andrew Barbeau at that time. So
there are a number of problems with the male-female relationships in this film, which we will not shy away from. We're going to talk about them because you can't not talk about them. But we'll get to that when the most problematic of all shows up.
Yes.
So before that happens, Chalice basically falls asleep, at which point one of the for all intents and purposes are Men in Black. One of the Men in Black individuals shows up, kills the man, and then goes out and immolates himself in his car as Chalice chases after him. Now, I made a note here because I actually think this sequence is exceptionally well done. I like the fact that he wakes up and he doesn't know what's going on, and he doesn't just instantly spring into action and get what's going on. I've got to stop him. Like he's like, what is going on? What is happening? Because he had just woken up. The nurse can't speak because she's traumatized by seeing her patient being killed. And so, by the time he puts it together, he comes out only to see the car explode with the man in it. And that whole sequence, I think, is masterfully done. I thought that top to bottom, from the point where he wakes up to the point where the car explodes, is riveting. I mean, that's just a very, very well done sequence.
And I remember at that point saying to myself, I'm like, this is how you do a movie. That's how you open a movie. That's what you do in the first 10 minutes of a movie is, you establish the main characters, you establish their flaws and or proclivities, and then you set a person on fire. I'm like, let's go. Let's do this.
So, of course, there is a police investigation. The police show up, and Dr. Chalice starts to become obsessed with what's going on, because this is something unlike anything he's ever encountered before. And we get that in a conversation that I pulled a clip from, where he is talking to a coroner that he will soon be hitting on with no shame. Well, although I should say she seems very receptive, so it is not a one-sided. That relationship seems to be a two-way street. Yeah. But we get this little conversation right before he, basically says, "Hey, do you want to, come on over and we'll hit the boots tonight?" But right before that, we get this.
Look, Chalice, I'm only the assistant.
Just tell me what you know, Teddy.
Not much. It's taking a while. The guy was just a pile of ashes. I know the sheriff thinks he was on drugs.
That doesn't make any sense. I've seen lots of people on drugs. The man was in complete control. He looked like a businessman.
He had to be one strong businessman, I can tell you that. You don't just pull someone's skull apart without a little lower arm strength. Know what I mean?
Teddy, just do me this one favor. Check this one out yourself.
No, I can't do that. It's got to go through the...
Please.
This thing's really got you.
I've been with that hospital for 8 years. Somebody just doesn't walk in.
I'll see what I can do. No promises.
Right. So we establish what the obsessive beginning of why he's going to go the lengths that he's going to go to. So, then they have this little flirtatious thing.
Yeah, and I feel like her character is a very true John Carpenter character, female character, where, she is highly educated, she's intelligent, she's holding her own weight. And so for me, this character throughout the movie feels very, very typical of the female characters that he has throughout his film. So that's why, like, at the start when he's like patting, nurses on the ass and stuff, I'm a little bit like, wait, who's writing this? But definitely with the introduction of that character, I'm like, oh, there's Lee from Assault on Precinct 13.
Yeah, and again, to reiterate, Carpenter did not write this. I have a hunch. It would feel more like Carpenter to me if he and the coroner went off to investigate this. That would be more of the classic kind of, the equals that are going out there applying each side of their knowledge to it. Him, the medical side, and her, the coroner side of things. But that's not the direction this movie goes, because soon after we see the daughter of the man who was killed that is, obviously in grief, and Dr. Chalice decides to start palling up with her and runs into her later in a store, and basically the two of them pretty quickly figure out that neither of them is going to let this mystery rest, that they have to find out what's going on, because for her, what her father's actions didn't make sense, and for him, it's, as he said, that this thing happened in his hospital, and he just wants to know what's going on with it. And so the two of them decide to look into this together. And so begins a love story, which is highly inappropriate and disturbing.
Yeah.
Because
what's the most disturbing part of it then? What's the most inappropriate part of it?
I think for me, my note, I will read verbatim.
Okay.
Atkins is 24 years older than a woman looking for her father, in caps. Her father. Yeah. I think between that and the way the ex-wife is portrayed, it's not a great movie for female representation in film.
No, and the thing is too, so there's this trope in films too, where often, when they cast male and female characters, they will, the male character, if they're supposed to be the same age, the male and the female character, they'll always cast an actor who's about, 5 to 10 years older than the female actress. It just tends to be this like trope that started. It's different, we've been getting better at it now, and you see movies with a little bit more balance, but this is just this isn't like 5 to 10 years. This is, like you said,
noticeably a different
and also
age.
Not just like just like not actual physical age, but also like their roles in the movie. I feel like maybe she's an undergrad and he's kind of he's headed to his second or third wife at this point in the film. So it feels a little creepy, little creepy.
Yeah, and just to jump out a little bit ahead to a note related to this, I have another note here I will read again. From first meeting to having sex in maybe 48 hours. And again, reminder, this woman's father just died horribly. So
little
there's
unbelievable.
many problems to the way this is laid out. It is a glaring issue that I'm not even going to pretend that, some people are going to have a problem looking over. And I don't blame you if it
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if it wrecks the movie for some people. It might. If it does, I don't blame you. I can't criticize that disgust. It is.
After the first 10, 15 minute sequence that starts really strong, I think then this starts to creep in, and I think this and some other inconsistencies at like sort of that 1/3 to halfway mark is when I said this is about the part where I'm being like, all right, like, maybe I'm not going to finish this. Maybe this is not a good film. I kind of said that to myself. And then a lot of other characters start showing up, and which I question a lot of them and kind of wonder why they're in the movie. So I think that relationship is one of the first things that sort of, made me concerned about completing the movie.
The middle of the movie definitely feels like maybe they didn't know how to connect the beginning and the end. That they really didn't have a clear path other than doing basically what feels like almost a poor comedy routine. Because basically once the two of them get together and decide to investigate, they're looking around, they're researching things, and what they do is they end up discovering that there's a town where these masks are made, because they find that the father was clutching a very popular Halloween mask. And so they go to this town, which is called Santa Mira, I believe. And this is where the movie starts. The movie both drags further and also picks up a bit, because as soon as they come into the town, one thing I really like is everybody's watching them. There's a very specific shift in the way this town feels. Very, Village of the Damned, Stepford Wives, whatever, where this is not a normal town. It is structured and presented as just a little town that this company helped build up, but there's cameras everywhere. Everybody who sees them going by is paying attention. They feel immediately under threat as soon as they get into the actual town.
Yeah, and that also gave me sort of a like troll vibe. It gave me sort of, Children of the Corn, some of these like some of these movies where it deals with sort of Oedic, like insider outsider, you're not from around here, interloper type thing. And so that felt very Carpenter-esque, a theme. But I started getting worried. I'm like, what is actually going on in this town, and is it kind of devolving into what I think? Don't they say Troll is like the worst
Troll
movie
2
ever
is
made?
considered the worst film, the worst bad good film of all time. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly. Bad and good, bad good. So I just started getting that kind of vibe, and that's my own fault. That's my own opinion. But so I was a little bit worried about where this whole thing was headed.
Well, I do have a note here. Maybe everybody's staring at you because they realize that your age difference is too much to reconcile. So yes, I'd be looking.
They're wondering, is that his daughter, or they don't? She's brunette. He has blonde hair. I don't think that's his daughter. It's a weird
vacation for a father and daughter to take. Oh no, one of those things. Also, I forgot to note one of the other things that might drive people crazy in this movie, but it actually does serve the film, is the repetition of the Shamrock theme, which is constant and driving. I think it's great, but I know a lot of people who hate that song. So,
no, I think that is one of the best devices in this movie. So there's things like that. There's like the opening sequence, which is really solid. There's some of this other subtle stuff where you said at the start, they're like mentioning Stonehenge. And I think at this point too, now when they get to the town, somebody happens to have a TV on and they're mentioning more about this sort of subplot that just doesn't really seem related to anything I'm watching. But yeah, I think there's the wonderful Shamrock theme device that's continuing to happen. And it's telling you a couple things. It's this musical trope, right? It's kind of the na 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 thing going on.
It's London Bridge is falling down. They basically that was public domain, so they took it and repurposed it. That's what it is.
Right. So that in itself, and it's also counting down to Halloween. So it's counting down to sort of the day that this movie is supposed to be about. So I actually really love it in the movie. I think the thing that confused me then too is then they still told you like how many days it was till Halloween. It's like, yeah, man, I just heard it in the song, and that did keep sort of a clock running too, so that you were like aware that we're moving faster and faster towards Halloween, and we're not really sure why, but there is something significant that's going to happen on Halloween. So I think that kind of pushed it forward. And it also let this is a big theme in a lot of Carpenter films, or Carpenter-like films, is this idea of there's this whole like subculture and maybe sort of subliminal messaging that is just prevalent and is, in this case, it's specifically geared towards children, because even his own kids, when his wife's not hysterically yelling, you see that Chalice's own kids are really interested in these masks as well.
No, I agree. Like I said, I know a lot of people hate it, but it does serve the purpose of the film, and I think you're right. The idea is instantly, or maybe not instantly, but it's very, very apparent very quickly that, okay, this countdown is not accidental. This something is going to happen if Halloween is reached. So it's almost as, okay, do they have to, if Halloween happens, does something just automatically happen? Can it be stopped? Is this something that will just be inevitable? Which, you can factor into the ending, which we'll get to, which is debated.
But like you say, though, at this point, it kind of drags. And so you're not like really sure, like what these other things are really how this going, and we meet some interesting characters that are also staying in the hotel in the small town, and bizarre things happen to them. And there's the family, which the sort of kind of Midwest kind of average family that happened to be there, and they seem just out of place. And like you said, they almost seem comedic. They seem like
my note is hotel feels like it's from a comedy movie. Even Atkins says, quote, "It's a zoo." Yeah, the middle 20 of this movie, or maybe there's a 20-minute or so chunk that if you don't stick through it, it's understandable. I get it. You do have to kind of go, all right, this has to be going somewhere. Unfortunately, it is, but this is the part of the movie where in some films where I've said that to myself and I've stuck with it, no, it never went anywhere. And I was like, you fool, you fool. So it is a rough middle, again, because I just don't think they knew what to do. Although it does, to comedic credit again, it does deliver this magnificent exchange where it's almost as if the movie is trying to diffuse something that can't be diffused. So let me just play this and it will speak for itself.
Boy, aren't you just the least bit tired?
No.
Wait a minute. How old are you?
Relax. I'm older than I look.
Now, we must say, this question of his has taken place after they've had sex at least once. At least once. And now he asks.
Yeah. So, and it seems like that where you're just kind of like, the movie starts to show its age. You know what I mean? It starts to kind of show its sign. But it, like you said, it almost feels comedic, that you're like, are they serious? Are the directors, and the writers serious about this right now? Or is this kind of, are they kind of playing around with us? Because even, when the Kupfers enter, like sort of around this time as fellow guests of the hotel, Buddy and Betty and then little Buddy, they seem to be kind of very one-dimensional, kind of, the all-American family, family. And it just, you start to lose, earlier in the movie, a man set himself on fire in their car, and we're trying to figure out what that has to do with these masks, and then, the death of Ellie's father. But then all of a sudden the Kupfers are in here, and they're this kind of weird, kind of Midwest hunky-dory family.
Yeah, it is a bizarre tonal sequence. And the fact that line about the age is in there clearly means somebody recognized that people might think she was under 18. And it's just like, okay, if you realized that, then maybe, but, whatever. The movie's... It's what it is. So again, I just want to make it clear. We're not pretending that this doesn't exist in this movie, because I don't want to just dance over it. It is gross, and it is not something you're going to be able to ignore. If this movie didn't have a sex scene, it might be easier, but the fact that it's there is even worse.
And even that just felt forced and kind of
out of nowhere,
comedic, kind of comedic. Yeah, because it happens, like you said, within 48 hours of them meeting one another. Absolutely.
So again, we're just pointing it out, so it's not as if we're not aware of it. It is not a flawless film by any stretch. I'll leave it at that. So
no, but I don't think this middle section was. I don't think it was a mistake. I think they're playing around with. I think they're trying to shift momentum, and I think they're also trying to shift from the horror aspect of this film into the science fiction aspect.
Yes, and the Midwestern family is a very good plant for a later scene. So that part, at this point, you're going to be like, why? What is this? And for a while, it doesn't feel like it makes any sense, and that's because the hammer is going to get dropped later. So that part is fine. The comedic element of it, they could have downplayed that. literally Tom Atkins almost gets hit by about 4 different cars at different points. It's just it is almost a Jerry Lewis sketch for a small amount of time.
You know,
so
I was thinking of John Candy in Summer Rental or something like that.
Sure,
You know, like it just felt it had that sort of
honestly,
kind of vibe
if
to
John Candy had showed up, it would not have seemed out of place, which is the problem with the way this whole sequence goes. Is that would not have seemed
that would
have seemed unusual.
Yeah. If he played Buddy Kupfer,
then it's all over. It would be
well,
both
I
great
think that would
and
have been,
all over.
I think this movie would have traumatized me then.
I don't know. But on the other side of it, right after that sequence, then we get these really wonderful long shots of empty streets because there's a curfew in this town. Basically, at 7 p.m., you are to get off the street and nobody blinks an eye to it, except, of course, Chalice, Atkins, goes around and he runs into a homeless man who basically says that, you know, the Cochran, who is the Don, is it Don O'Hurley or Dan? I think it's Don, right? Am I wrong?
It's Dan.
Dan,
O'Hurley.
it is Dan, the RoboCop guy. Yeah. So says, oh, yeah, he runs this town, and he's basically saying, no, there's something going on, and I'm, you know, I don't care. Everybody else is scared of him. I'm not, whatever. And then in the hotel, one of the people staying there discovers she's, what is she saying? There's a defective order that she wants to get fixed or something to that.
Right.
I'm trying to remember why she finds that thing.
Yeah. So there's all different reasons why people are supposed to be there. You know, the family, I think the Kupfers are doing some type of
they're the top
tour.
sales people, so they've been invited to tour the factory because they're so good at selling masks. And
is it? I'm trying to remember. Is it Wendy Westberg as Teddy? Is that the woman's name?
Teddy is the coroner. The woman who's alone in the hotel is Marge. Marge is the one who starts screwing with the microchip. If that's what you're trying to think of.
And that's Garn Stevens apparently. So.
Yes, is the actress's name. And I know I think she was somebody's wife at the time. I don't remember now. She was somebody's wife, I think, in the production. Well, of course, now I can't figure it out. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So she is in her hotel room.
Oh, she's Tom Atkins' spouse.
That's it. I knew it was somebody.
1971 and 93. They are now divorced. But
so she must have loved what was going on in that movie. Anyway, I sure know that. Well, you got to be a real tolerant spouse if some of this stuff is going on in the film where your husband or wife is in it, or maybe it's just me. I'm just saying I'd be looking at some of those scenes I'd be in the room
carefully.
going, I'm just going to watch what's going on here. All right, so. She finds there's a microchip that we see multiple times. We see the back of the mask has a little disc on it, which has a Silver Shamrock logo, but it happens to fall on the floor, and she notices that there is circuitry on the back. And so for some reason, she decides to start screwing around with the microchip with a hairpin, which is probably not something I would naturally think to do, but that's what she does. And the thing lasers her face to... gory effect where her face is basically stripped of skin in the front, and then insects start coming out of it. And that is our kind of big clue that, there's something going on with the masks, which I think is probably, you might have guessed that already, but this is the kind of the big, this is, and immediately, if you just start logicking the thing out, you go, wait a minute, these are masks being worn by children. Why are there lasers in masks being worn by children? And so I think at that point we start to ramp, like right after that comedic tonal mismatch, the movie immediately kind of kicks in and says, well, wait a minute, we are going to get back to this. We didn't forget about it with, motel hijinks and inappropriate sex. No, there is a point that we're going to get back to here. And so then the next day, the family and Atkins and his extraordinarily underage girlfriend go to the factory and are being get a tour through it, and we meet Cochran, who is Dan O'Hurley, who is magnetic the minute he's on the screen. He's doing this wonderful, as he said, I think he said, if I read correctly, the whole reason he did the movie was so he could do this Irish accent because he is Irish, and he wanted to do kind of a authentic accent. So he said, the movie was rubbish, but at least I got to do this really fun accent and, talk about stuff that is related to my background. And he's great because he comes off as jovial and, friendly, and he's celebrating the fact that the Clampets or whatever their name are sold a bunch of these masks. But at the same time, there is a very clear, sinister, this is the bad guy. It's very clear. Okay.
Well,
this is the guy.
It's kind of the same role he plays in RoboCop, where you can tell he's the establishment, that there's something about him that, no rich man is innocent, like this idea that the way he has built this business or assumed this wealth, there's something nefarious behind it. And it could be that he has a sinister plot, or it could just be that he's a very sort of shrewd and kind of a cutthroat business person. So you're not really sure, but you can see him sort of not being himself and sort of tolerating everybody, especially like Buddy and Betty and Little Buddy. You can see he really detests them, but for some reason he seems to be humoring them and has invited them, and he even entertains when Buddy is kind of asking him about different marketing aspects and wants to talk business with them and won't take no for an answer. He's humoring them, but you can just see he really resents them and just has a real disdain for this all-American family.
So at one point, Chalice overhears some of the technicians, or actually at the hotel, when the body was taken away of the woman, he overhears a technician talking about something misfiring. And so he knows there's something going on. He doesn't know what it is, but he knows there's something going on. So he goes on the tour the next day. And as you said, Cochran is very nice, very accommodating, even if it's grudgingly so, until there's a point where there's a door that says final processing. And when Buddy wants to go in it, he is very clearly stopped by Cochran, who says, well, it's a proprietary thing. But at that point, all the joviality kind of comes to a halt. He's still pleasant enough, but that is an absolute no, it's not going to happen. And he basically diverts them out. And so as they are leaving, Ellie notices that her father's car is on the plant grounds, and she immediately starts to go towards it, and Chalice stops her and says, no, because he sees that they are surrounded by people. So
they're
he's
being
like,
watched.
no, yeah, we're this is not a place to flip out. Let's go call the police. Now we have some concrete evidence that something is going on, so let's try to call the police. Problem is, you can't call anybody. At this point, the town has essentially been sealed off from the rest of the world. There's no ability to reach anybody by phone, and then Ellie is kidnapped by Cochran's men. So Chalice goes to the factory, and he breaks in, and Cochran has talked about the fact that he has a background in toys, and has a long history making toys and all this stuff. And so Chalice is wandering through, and he is attacked by one of the men in suits, and then punches into him and discovers that he is in fact an automaton. Now they use the word android on the wiki, but I don't know that would necessarily be correct. It's more of a kind of mechanical Turk type of a very advanced device. Now the interesting part is, only once does one of them speak, which I think is why people seem to infer they're androids. The rest of the time, they're basically just silent. In fact, one of them is played by the guy who played Michael Myers in Halloween 2, like the main android who does get killed at some point. And so at this point now, the gig is up, and Cochran shows up, and he's like, oh, you broke my toy, because he broke this mechanical woman. And so, but he's not angry. He's not anything. He's in complete control, and he's just like, well, I guess before we kill you, let's take in and show you everything that we've done. And so now we get to kind of the final segment of the film, where we're going to finally get an explanation of everything that's going on. And it includes a little demonstration, which I'm going to let you explain, because I think this is, for you, the signature moment of the film.
Yes. So up until here, there's been some weird dating and maybe some illegal legal acts happening. There's almost this comedic sort of aspect to it at the hotel. And then, there's also some kind of gory scenes. You have people's heads being melted by lasers. And I believe in that scene where Marge face is melted in the hotel, I think they hint at that. You see, I think, is it a single bee or something come out of the skull? So immediately you're like, okay, this movie is going to be violent. And that's the first time I think you see, besides somebody setting themselves on fire, that's the first time you really see this like intense violence. So so you're like, okay, this is going to be a violent movie, but for some reason there's bees involved or something. So then, as you mentioned, there's the scene with Chalice and the automaton or android or whatever you want to call it, robot toy, one of Connell's toys. And, it's kind of really gross and kind of a sloppy scene as well. So we're starting to like build up sort of this kind of, sort of more of the kind of gore instead of sort of a thriller. But then there's the demonstration. And up until this point, I didn't really have strong feelings about the movie. Like I said, I promised I would finish it. But it's the scene with the Kupfers and Buddy, Betty, and Little Buddy. They enter this room that, for all intents and purposes, looks like just like a 70s, 80s family room, or a TV room. And, complete with sort of the faux shag carpets, couches. And the family is asked to sit down there, and Little Buddy is asked to put the mask on. And there's the commercial, right? And we haven't, I think, for at least a little while now, we haven't seen the big giveaway commercial yet, we haven't seen it in a while, but there it is now on the TV. And for me, this was a moment where even the opening, where we're looking at that cathode TV that we talked about with the wonderful opening music, it all starts to come together that somehow the TV, the mask, this weird Irish cult or town or sort of private town and business all have something to do with each other, and it's pretty sinister. And at this moment, I was waiting for the camp. I was waiting for the gory, campy part of the film. And instead, it's probably one of the most unsettling scenes I've seen in a long time. Like I said, I watched this during the summer, and the music starts playing, and we get to see what the song, when it completes, what actually, and when Halloween does finally come, we see what the mask can actually do. And it's not just a laser. It's not just this small thing. It is the laser. It is the harming of Little Buddy, this small child. And, we talk about like scenes where you have to look away. And all I know is that there were all different types of bugs and centipedes coming out of this mask that this child was wearing. And of course, some very also gory and horrible fate befalls Buddy, Big Buddy, or Buddy Sr. and Betty as well. And at that point, I think I stopped to like take a break, and I was like, wow, what I just watched was really messed up. And for me then, that put everything into perspective, this idea of all the other things. I still don't know what Stonehenge is about, but all the other things I had seen prior into that movie were a setup for that. And I think the comedic aspect of the Kupfers was trying to get me to sort of underestimate what their role was in the movie, besides just being comedic relief. If anything, they were the lambs to the slaughter.
Yeah, it's a wonderfully done scene if you've never seen it, because the way that you never see Buddy's face. So I think this is one of the most brilliant decisions. Once this starts, the mask, which normally is very dry and it looks like a rubber mask, but it starts to get wet, and it starts, his head is basically almost like a rotten pumpkin is beginning to fold in on itself, because at first he puts his hands on it and he's pushing on his face, and he collapses, and you just see the mask pulsating, and then all this stuff floods out of it, but you never see any blood. There's never any actual gore. Unlike the scene where the woman's face got blasted off, you never actually see any explicit gore of the child, but that child has died horribly. Because it goes on for a good 2 or 3 minutes.
It was horrifying. And, it was horrifying because it was a child, obviously. And, that's not something we enjoy to see. But it was just so horrifying because now this thing that's being broadcast, this thing that's being promoted, and it opens the whole movie up now to this large, what we thought was a subplot is the actual plot of the movie, that pretty much any child that is going to have a mask or celebrate Halloween is now going to have this same fate. And I think actually by not seeing the face or not really seeing what happens, it's even just more horrifying.
Yeah, I agree. There, basically, if because I'm looking at the stills of it just to get an idea, and there, you get the very small suggestions of the face, but you don't actually see anything. And so, in your mind, because this is one of the things the human brain does, is it maps things even if it can't necessarily see them. So
absolutely, yeah,
you
and that's
are
worse.
seeing
That's worse.
it. Yes, it's definitely worse.
It's
because
worse. It's
you're
worse
imagining
than anything.
what that is.
Anything they could have done, it would have been gory, and it probably would have got campy and silly. So the fact that we're not seeing it, it makes it even more horrifying. And, I think it just immediately brought up that trope of, how there was the whole sort of like urban legend or conspiracy theory about, nails or pins in candy.
Yes,
right?
yes, of course.
And it was this whole concept about that there was this, cult or this group of people that were putting pins and needles in Halloween candy. So check your Halloween candy because there's some really sick people out there. Well, it turns out that the one case that was related to it ended up being, defunct, and that it was more, just sort of hysteria than an actual occurrence or an event. And it made me think about that. And so I'm seeing this kind of horrible scene, but I'm also thinking about it and being like, oh no, there really are these evil people that are preying on children.
Right. And we should note that throughout the movie, you are very clearly told that these masks are selling off the shelves. They can't sell enough.
Yes,
that
that's
they're
a
the
good
biggest
point.
selling masks, which means that millions of kids have them.
And
that's the idea.
even Charles's kids, in the scene with his hysterical wife, even in that scene, you see that the children are, or perhaps a later scene, you can see that the children are obsessed with getting those specific masks for Halloween because
he brings home I think it's a Dracula maybe mask and maybe Frankenstein, but they're very cheap, kind of $2 plastic masks that don't look real at all. And they're like, no, we don't want these. We want the real masks. Right. And we then see them wearing them, watching television even before the giveaway. So it's clearly been the layering of the commercial over and over and over is getting
marketing.
Them. When you watch this commercial, wear your mask. Make sure you do it. And so we see this horrific
which you
scene.
think is which by the way, you think that's sort of the benign thing that like a marketing strategy, like if it was like, in our growing up in the 80s, with the different toys, like have your He-Man toy and watch He-Man with your He-Man toy.
Oh,
absolutely. And like make sure,
yeah.
So it felt very in the time of sort of 80s marketing for children where it's like, you have the show, you have the merchandising, and maybe there's a breakfast cereal.
Sure.
What's the Schwartz or Spaceballs
Spaceballs,
breakfast cereal?
Merchandising.
Merchandising. Yeah. So it felt very much like that, and then you're like, so now you realize that this is not a multi-level marketing scheme. This is some really horrible people that want to do really bad things to kids.
Yeah, subtracting the whole children killing element, this feels like absolutely what a company would do. Yes, this is how marketing works. This is how you do it. You bring in your big sellers and you make them feel special so they sell more. Like it's all, that part is dead on.
It just makes it more unsettling because, when I saw the kid and when I was thinking about this like marketing strategy, I was like, oh, Joe, when we were growing up, like this is how they marketed it to kids, right? And we didn't see it as a negative thing. We just was like, oh yeah, like, you watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and you like get all the toys and then you like watch the show and then they've got video games and, so it was just like sort of, that's like part of my childhood. So when I saw this scene, I was just like, oh, like there was a lot flowing through. And also, it's an 80s movie. So it was like horror wrapped into nostalgia. And it was really unsettling for me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, because, when we were younger, I think Halloween was a different thing where we really did go. Right. I mean, we would spend all night. I know when I was younger, we'd be out all night and you'd be going all over the place. But also, there are famous cartoons. I think it was either Transformers or He-Man. That started, the only reason for the cartoon was because that's how they wanted to sell the toys. They didn't care about the cartoon whatsoever. They just needed it to be there so you wanted to get the toy. So, that's what I mean about outside of the, the mystical and the killing kids thing. This feels like it is almost a very accurate depiction of how marketing and sales works. This is how you do it, and this is how you build an empire. It just so happens this empire is trying to kill children.
And that is the Carpenter bent on this. Like, you know, I know, it wasn't written by Carpenter. It was written by Tommy Lee Wallace. But that, to me, feels very Carpenter-esque. So this is a Carpenter film at that point for me, because Carpenter would take it too far. He would harm a kid. He would take it too far. He would make it extremely unsettling. And then while doing that, also be making a really strong commentary about society and or, you know, marketing and business within society.
And also something else that feels like a very Carpenter element to me comes in the explanation of what's going on. Because after this scene, Cochran takes Chalice into a room, puts a mask on him, and says, "Okay, I'm gonna turn on Halloween," which is, you know, a little bit of a cute, it's
right.
Halloween thing. And you'll hear that music in the clip that I've got here, so you will hear the actual Halloween theme. But he basically is gonna leave him in the room so that he will also get lasered and turned into a bug head, I guess. And of course, Chalice says, "Well, why? Why are you doing this?" And we get what is probably, for me, my favorite thing in the whole movie, which is the explanation. I have the whole thing here because it is not only a magnificent bit of dialogue, but it is magnificently delivered. So I'm going to play it.
Enjoy the horror-thon, Doctor. And don't forget to watch the big giveaway afterwards.
Why, Cochran? Why? Do I need a reason?
Mr. Kupfer was right, you know. I do love a good joke, and this is the best ever. A joke on the children. But there's a better reason. You don't really know much about Halloween. You thought no further than the strange custom of having your children wear masks and go out begging for candy. It was the start of the year in our old Celtic lands, and we'd be waiting in our houses of wattles and clay. The barriers would be down, you see, between the real and the unreal. And the dead might be looking in to sit by our fires of turf. Halloween. The festival of Samhain. The last great one took place 3,000 years ago, and the hills ran red with the blood of animals and children. Sacrifices. Part of our world. Our craft. Witchcraft. To us, it was a way of controlling our environment. It's not so different now. It's time again. In the end, we don't decide these things, you know. The planets do. They're in alignment, and it's time again. The world's going to change tonight, Doctor. I'm glad you'll be able to watch it.
Now there's a little bit of a gap here, so I will forward this because I forgot I had that gap in here. Sorry. Here we go. This is just a little capper for it.
And happy Halloween.
And there we get the Halloween theme as it trails off. So,
Right.
yeah, I that monologue, that bit of explanation is so great. That and the kid, the death scene, they overcome any flaws of the movie for me. I love that explanation so much.
Well, so at that point, then we're like, oh no, they know what they were doing. They knew what they were doing, and I think, regardless if you disagree with some of the things that have happened here, I mean, like pick what you want to pick, whether lawful, illegal, or just not right to have in a film. This is clear they knew what they were doing, and that's the whole story. The whole story is that these masks, we still don't know how yet, but we know the masks are in some way going to harm all these children, and it comes back to this old sort of Celtic tradition of sort of this pagan celebration, and that happens when the planets are aligned. So it's interesting because once again, and kind of like when we saw violence against children in Precinct 13, once again, when it happens in Precinct 13, it's done very matter-of-factly and without a lot of thought. And once again, we're hearing Colin here basically, or Cochran, just basically describe just a ritual or sort of a force of nature, and it's not sort of a personal thing. It's just sort of, you know what, it's time for the world to change. And that feels layered in that whole business mindset of like, we're facing, the market has changed. We're facing, just a new world, or we're
it's
bringing
time to
on a new
disrupt
world.
things, everybody. Disruption,
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah. And so it just feels like, it's rooted in this Celtic tradition, but there's still that weird sort of kind of corporate America angle on it as well. And at this point we know this is like serious, and this is not a comedy, and it's they know what they're doing. And now all the random stuff about, well, we still don't know why Stonehenge, but now we must know there's some connection between Stonehenge and an old Celtic or a pagan celebration.
Yeah, and Sarwan is a real thing. It was a celebration of, I think, Halloween, essentially, the October, the end of October, the equinox, I think. Now, as far as I could tell, because I did look to see if there was any basis for, some of his more extravagant claims, I did not find any evidence of child sacrifice, so I don't know that the hills ever ran red with blood. But the thing where he talks about the barriers being down, that is part of it, where they believe that some of the spirits of the dead could actually come over and see them. That's part of the reason why they wore costumes, was to, in some cases, if they were afraid of the dead, maybe they had wronged them, it would hide them from them. So there is enough in here where it's clearly not just made up whole cloth, and that's, of course, some of the best fabrications have the kernels of truth inside them, and so I thought of like The Wicker Man, another classic where there's kind of a pagan ritual, and but yes, so the delivery, though,
it just goes into the whole, it's fantastic. And you have, I think, throughout a lot of the Carpenter movies, when there needs to be a real, gravitas performance, or somebody who can really, carry sort of the theory of the movie, in this case, sort of the conspiracy theory cult plot, you need, like Donald Pleasance takes care of in a lot of the Halloween films, as well as in other films. You need somebody who can kind of project the idea. And here's the thing. I feel like if that was explained to us earlier in the movie, we wouldn't have taken it seriously, and it would have been cheesy. And I think the fact that we saw some of it, a small part of it in action, a test run of it, and we saw how horrific that was, we listened to this monologue, and we listened to every word, and we know this man is truly evil.
Yes, and then we get a follow-up set of sequences that do kind of border on goofy again. I wrote warehouse sequence is pure lunacy, where he's escaping and there's lightning and super like crackles of energy and things are blowing up. And so it's
but I will say, such a Carpenter set, that set where there's the computer consoles, the kind of 80s, 70s, 80s computer consoles in a circle, around these like men in lab coats, or, androids in lab coats. That, to me, that was like, oh, that is such a Carpenter looking scene, the way it was lit, just the way it was filmed, and the way the technology is kind of showcased in this really sort of minimalist way. And so that, to me, once again, I was like, oh, that's a very striking scene. That's very striking. And then, of course, there was lightning. So the look was very, very reminiscent of Carpenter. The way that scene plays out, not so much, but that's okay, because honestly, one of the consistent criticisms of Carpenter all through his movies is that he wasn't exactly great at staging action in many cases either. So I'm not going to come down too hard on Wallace here. It's just that it follows up such a wonderful, like, serious, grave moment with tonal shift, a total complete tonal shift to, now this movie is going to get really, like, I'm not going to forget this movie. This is going to be unsettling, to more kind of like hijinks.
Yes, exactly. Hijinks in a warehouse. So Chalice finds Nancy and gets her and escapes. And as they leave the warehouse, which blows up and detonates, again, kind of a little bit over the top, but that's all right. I mean, so Stonehenge, I guess that rock is now gone. So much for history. And so they escape. And as they're driving away, Chalice is talking to Nancy. And we discover that she is not Nancy. She has either been transformed or replaced. I think it's supposed to be a replacement. And she is now, in fact, an android. So we've gone from problematic relationship to we're going to take this poor, traumatized woman who has been basically predated by a man, and we're going to just make her into an android that he will rip the head off of. And that's exactly what happens. He basically knocks her block off. And so he has continued his history of having problematic exes. One that just won't leave him alone, and the other that's been decapitated.
Right, and then there's this really campy part where I feel like there's like an arm or a limb or something, like a hand still grabbing onto him.
Jumps
it felt
at him,
very, very Evil Dead, but not in the good way that Evil Dead does that. Kind of out of great in Evil Dead, sort of out of place in this film.
Yeah. Fortunately, the movie doesn't end there. We then get another rather famous sequence where he shows up at is it the same gas station? Does he end up at the same gas station? Yeah, same guy. That's why I said the gas station guy's having a bad couple weeks.
Yes.
So he ends up at the gas station, calls the local TV stations, and manages to convince them to not run it on at least a few of their channels. But then it ends on him screaming, stop it, because he realizes that there's still a channel, because he's flipping through the channels. And at this point, there's maybe, 30, let's say tops. So he's gone through 6 or 7, and then he realizes that one of the stations is still running it. And so the movie then ends with him screaming, stop it, and you really don't know whether a bunch of millions of kids have died or not. So it leaves on a very Carpenter-esque cliffhanger.
Yeah, and you know what's really nice, though, is prior to that, or at some point before that, we start to see the gravity. So after we've seen, what happened to little Buddy, we are then shown a bunch of children sort of getting ready to go out on Halloween, and we're even told the locations. So, we see someplace on the West Coast, we see, and so it starts to build that sort of like the gravity of the situation that this is, children coast to coast and in different places around the United States that are all getting ready to, maybe they're coming back from trick-or-treating. And by the way, this was the nostalgia thing. I saw costumes that I probably had when I was that age.
Oh,
so it was just, it was kind of, that was a great scene to kind of open it up from this we were in that closed community for a good portion of the movie now. So to have it open back up to being like, this is sort of what's at risk. I thought that was a really nice way to sort of kind of, bring some finality and some sort of kind of gravity to everything we had seen before.
Yeah, so there are many great parts of the ending. It's just that there's these little in-between bits that I probably could have done without. I could have skipped the android Nancy, and maybe if he had just blown up the factory and we didn't have to see all the, Looney Tunes special effects. But it still ends in a way that feels like it is a very Carpenter ending where you don't know. Atkins has maintained that in his opinion he saved everybody, but of course the movie doesn't tell us. And apparently the original ending was going to play audio of kids screaming in mass to indicate that he did not succeed, and they decided to make it ambiguous and not include that audio, which on the one hand, boy, would that have been a kick in the nuts to end the movie like that to everybody. But I far prefer the ambiguous ending where you can just assign whatever you want to it and think, well, did he or didn't he save all these kids? So I like the ending better, but boy, I'd love to hear that audio because that must have been terrible.
Yeah, and so they must have gotten, stage actors or, kids to come in and just scream. It was probably fun for them. They probably just told him to scream as loud as you can, and they probably got candy or ice cream.
So the kids were probably just they were like, "Here's a bunch of candy, a bunch of candy. Here's some pixie sticks. Eat like 7 or 8 of these.
They sugared them up. They sugared them up.
Sugar them up. Here's a 5-hour, or here's some Jolt Cola for the time. Just drink 3 or 4 of these.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was the '80s, so they didn't know that Jolt Cola was probably not something kids should be drinking.
Twice the caffeine, all the sugar. Yeah, just give them a bunch of this, and then we'll just have them bounce around a room for 20 minutes, and we'll just take the audio and we'll do what we need to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
So Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. I got to admit, I love this movie. Problems at all, I love it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of issues with this movie. And I don't know if it's like an editing thing, if it's a script thing or whatever, but there were some issues. But like I said, there's some scenes that were just really memorable in this, and I think, you know, if you haven't seen it, you should go and at least watch it once. Stick with it, and I think you'll notice you're kind of disappointed in some ways, and then pretty terrified in other ways.
I didn't check to see if this one is streaming anywhere. I meant to do that. That was something so I could tell people where they could watch it. Let's take a quick look.
I was able to watch all of these on Prime Video, and you can rent it. I believe it's like $3.99. So
yeah, it's included. There's the rental. It's on Peacock and AMC if you have those. So yes, you can stream. It is streamable. I own the Blu-ray, so if you love it as much as I do, you'll just buy it because you know, why not? But I agree. It is of all the movies that we watched, it's probably the one with the most problems.
Right.
But excellent theme. It still has the Carpenter feel. It still has a lot of beautiful shots. It has these shocking moments that really land well. They don't feel cheap or campy or unnecessary. Right. The unnecessary stuff is outside of the horror elements, believe me. But the actual core of the movie, I think, is solid and good enough that it overcomes the problems. But you are going to have to, as you said, you have to stick with this. This is not like, you know, when we watch The Salt and Escape, you don't even think about the time. You sit there and go, man, this movie is almost over, and I just started watching it, didn't I? And this is less smooth in that the pacing is a little off at times. So, you know, I can't say, no, everybody's wrong. It's perfect. No, it's not. It's not. But, but it's worth watching.
Absolutely.
And on that note, we're going to go to our little intermission so that you can go to the snack bar and get yourself
to the
lobby and get yourself a Dr. Pepper.
Cola. Jolt Cola.
If only they had made a Jolt Cola intermission, I would absolutely use it. But I don't. I will look. If anybody,
I don't think anybody would. No one would come back to the movie. Everyone would just go like run a marathon after that. You'd have like so much energy. Yeah. Just lift a truck or something like that.
Yes, so whatever you want to drink, go drink it. And we'll take our little break here, and we'll come back, and we will talk about Starman. So show will start again in 1 minute.
Show starts in 1 minute.
国民の皆さん、我がジョルトといよいよ攻撃態勢に入りました。魅惑のプレゼントであなたのハートをがっちりキャッチ。お子様からお年寄りまで喜ばれるデイパックプレゼント。ジョルトもっと愛して過激なコーラジョルトコーラ飲むぞおごるぞもらうぞ。
Well, welcome back. The problem with being 45 and drinking a Jolt Cola is now I think my heart's about to burst out of my chest, but you know what? It's worth it. Anyway.
Mild palpitations.
Yep, just a bit. Just ride through it. There we go. Okay.
Just stop, drop, and roll. I think that's what you're supposed to do, right?
That's
stop,
what they always say. Get under, duck and cover, stop, drop, and roll at the same time.
Get in the doorway. Get in the doorway. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Get in the doorway. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that one's actually true or not. That one might actually be true. I know the other two are nonsense.
I think that's for a hurricane, but yeah, it's still good.
Oh,
advice.
No, I'm sorry. No, kids. If any kids are listening, no, stop, drop, and roll is for fire. The duck and cover was the fake one. No. Stop, drop, and roll does work. Sorry. Anyway.
I'm sure there'll be a huge group of child listeners for this program, especially after what we've discussed in Halloween 3.
I was just going to say, I don't want to get pinned with child deaths. We just discussed child deaths. I don't want anybody coming at me with it. So.
No.
Well, we're gonna go in a radically different direction with this film. But as I said, the pairing makes sense because it is a diversion for Carpenter's typical track record. So the movie we're talking about in this case is 1984 Starman, which is directed by Carpenter, unlike the last film, but is not scored by him. No. Instead, it is scored by, oh boy, I'm going to try this, Jack Nitzsche?
Nietzsche or Nietzsche. Yeah.
Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was why it was. Yep. He's something. I mean, that's a very specific spelling. Something. So it's a tougher name than John Carpenter. So that's why it's tripping me up.
Yeah, he actually has quite an interesting background as a musician, and I don't know if you want me to get into that now, but
no, I don't know anything about him. So by all means.
So the thing that really blew my mind, and I knew he had scored some other films. I know he had done that. I knew this was like his era. Like I knew he did like 70s and 80s movies. And I knew he did the theme for, and I don't know why I know this. I guess I'll just admit it. He did the theme for Officer and a Gentleman, which I don't think I've ever seen that movie, but I know the song that won an Academy Award for Best Original Song, and that was Up Where We Belong, which is the Joe Cocker kind of ballad song. I don't know if you've known it. It's pretty cheesy kind of.
It's the
song.
only thing I know of that movie, but yes, I do.
Right,
I mean,
right, yeah.
It's
I don't
one of
think
those movies
I know
where it's like what do you call it? Time After Time. Of course, everybody knows Time After Time,
Right,
even if you don't like it.
Right. I know Richard Gere's in it, and is it Deborah Winger? Winger. That's all I know. And there's an office, and he's wearing a uniform at one point. And it had that famous Joe Cocker song, which was actually written by Jack Nietzsche. So the thing, though, that's interesting about him is that he first came to prominence in the early 1960s as the right-hand man of producer Phil Spector. So if you know anything about Phil Spector, kind of a crazy guy, had a lot of hits in the 60s and was sort of this sort of guru of pop songs. He was like the big pop producer, like the Mark Ronson of or Bruno Mars of his time. So yeah, he has won awards, many different movies. He also did the soundtrack for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a fantastic film. So he also did Cruising, which is a very bizarre movie starring Al Pacino, about sort of, we were talking last time about how bad New York had gotten in the 1970s, and Cruising is part of that scene. So, he definitely was like a known soundtrack maker, film score at the time. So he was definitely capable of creating a soundtrack for a Carpenter film. And as we talk more about it, I mean, we might listen to some of the theme. I think it's really interesting how, once again, here's, they hire an outside composer to write the theme, but there was still this sort of requirement or demand or mandate, really, to keep it, Carpenter-esque, or to have elements that would be indicative of other Carpenter films. Yeah,
the interesting part about this is we don't actually hear the theme until about an hour into the movie, and I mean really hear it. There are elements of it.
You're right.
And so we'll get little bits and pieces. It's sprinkled throughout, but we don't really get it. Unlike a lot of Carpenter movies where we get it right at the opening, it is generally in a Carpenter film the first thing you hear, or it's over the credits.
Absolutely.
And in this case, we really don't get to hear it, and it is very distinctive and extremely memorable, but we don't get it for a long time, which, again, is a bit of a deviation for what we typically expect out of a John Carpenter film.
Sure, but by the end, it's like we get the full 120 dB version, piping loud, kind of all in our face at the end. So, and I made some notes about why that actually is and why the composer decided to do that.
Well, let's do the numbers on it first. Let's do the budget and box office numbers and kind of who's in it. We'll do the basic overview, and then we'll dive into it.
Great. So this is also a very interesting film for Carpenter because it is one of the only films that was nominated for an Academy Award. Now, the film itself wasn't awarded, but this is one of the only films he's worked on where the Academy was involved. So let's do a quick synopsis of it here, a quick overview. It's, of course, Starman is the movie we're talking about. It's 1984. It's an American science fiction romance drama film. It's directed by John Carpenter that tells the story of a non-corporeal alien who has come to Earth and cloned a human body, portrayed by Jeff Bridges. That all tracks, right? In response to the invitation found on the gold phonograph record installed on the Voyager 2 space probe. So this is a real thing. I'm not sure if you know about that, but the Voyager 2 space probe that they sent out, they had a record of music and performances. You can still get a copy of it, or you can find out what songs were actually on that record. I think like Beethoven, one of Beethoven's symphonies was on that record. But they tried to compile a record of music on those albums as well that signified all the different music of the world. So there was, of course, symphonies on there. There was, traditional African music on there, as well as many other cultures' sort of most profound, sort of music. So that is a real thing. Obviously,
interestingly, if I can jump in for a second, I'm going to send you a link to this. I backed a Kickstarter 6 years ago that was a recreation of the golden record. So I have a golden record that they recreated and they redid it. And it's an actual vinyl record, and it's in this box. It's got all the engravings. It's got a book with it. Just coincidentally, because I watched this, I went, "Oh, I have the golden record." I'd forgotten. I mean, it's beautiful. They did a great job with it. But yeah, I backed this, back in 2017, because I was like, I love the idea of the golden record, and of course, it's this is very of its time optimism of go out and try to contact aliens and welcome them, and of course the movie's welcome to them is to shoot at them, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but yes, I love the golden record. I so much Absolutely. I wanted one, and that's what I got.
Well, that's great. And you're right. I think that encapsulates this whole era of sort of, space exploration and just kind of the eye on the sky. It's important to note that the original screenplay was actually written by Bruce A. Evans and Reynold Gideon, with, I guess, Dean Reisner making uncredited rewrites. Here's interesting about the reception of the film. The film received positive reviews, but faltered in its initial box office debut. Jeff Bridges, of course, was nominated for Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in the film. And it actually inspired, I have not seen this, but inspired the short-lived Starman television series in 1986. I can only imagine what that is.
I've never seen it.
So yeah, just some more particulars about this. As we mentioned before, the director is John Carpenter. Evans and Gideon are the primary writers. Let's see. The cinematographer is different now. It's Donald M. Morgan, so it's not Cundy that has been in a lot of the other films. Music is by Jack Nietzsche, as we mentioned. The budget on this is kind of the big story. It was released, by the way, in December 14th, 1984. It's 115 minutes. The budget is $24 million. So I think so far the most expensive movie we've looked at so far, most expensive budget we've looked at in a Carpenter film has been about $6 million, I think.
Yeah, far below this. Wow.
So this is $24 million, and the box office domestic gross was $28.7 million. So this was not a success. Also one of the sort of executive producers and backing producers was, of course, Michael Douglas, who at this time, had a few films under his belt where he had sort of accumulated some money and sort of popularity. So he was, kind of backing this, and you might be able to speak more on this as well, but for a while, this idea and this story had been sort of shopped around, and many different directors were sort of, asked or entertained the idea of actually doing this production. And when asked, why Carpenter did this movie, and we'll talk about this movie, and kind of, as you mentioned, it's maybe not in canon, or maybe seems kind of an odd fit for Carpenter. One of the reasons he said he did this movie, he just blatantly or blankly put that, I needed to show, big Hollywood that I could work on a large budget film, and that I could go through the process and complete a film. And that really resonated with me, because I feel like, a lot of times these directors will get pigeonholed into very specific genres or very specific styles of filming. And, to have a longer career in the industry, he had been going pretty consistently now for at least a decade, if not a decade before that, preparing even just for his, first films. So, to have a longer career in the industry, often you have to show that you're able to work with the big studios, work on a bigger budget, work on a smaller budget, and work in different venues. So this was sort of a movie that I think he wanted to do to show, the established Hollywood that he could do a movie like this. And then I think he saw that then this is going to allow me to get investors in the future when I want to do my own projects. And some of the later films we'll talk about on the next episode are clearly films that, he was very invested in and needed a lot of funding to pull off.
I always look at this movie and I like to think that, he says it as, oh, I did this to prove I could do these movies. But I almost look at the cynical side of that where it's like, yeah, they thought I couldn't do it, so I'm going to show them I can.
Sure,
even though I would prefer to just burn everything down with my hatred of everything that's going on.
Right.
So,
but I think he came to a crossroad, and maybe it was Deborah Hill, maybe it was somebody, that, a part of his team that just said like, no, John, like you have to do this movie so that you can do that you can keep making movies. And,
I would not be shocked if there was a very practical side to it, but I often see it written as if he said, oh, you know what? I had to prove I could go beyond what I'd done before. And I sit there and go, I don't know if that's really what his attitude was. I think it's more of a middle finger to people who said he couldn't do it. And so it was a way too, because there is a method in Hollywood, one for them, one for me, where you make a commercial production, something that's big and, very mainstream audience and everybody's going to like an E.T. type of movie where it's like, oh, look, little alien went back home. And then you make something that is subversive and more, biting, So it wouldn't surprise me if this was a way for him to test the waters on whether that was something that he could do. I would guess by the fact that it only made $4 million more than it cost, probably sank. That was probably the end of that particular attempt, which is a real shame, as we'll talk about, because it's a great film. But it doesn't seem like that really worked out because I don't know that he ever made another movie anywhere near as optimistic as this one. I mean, this is probably, would you say this is his happiest film outside of maybe Big Trouble in Little China?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think this movie, I think there's a few reasons why this movie didn't work in the box office. Like it did and it didn't, right? Backing up though real quick, you mentioned
it
E.T.
reviewed very well. We should know it reviewed very well.
And then of course, Bridges was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor in his role.
Right.
So
for a science fiction film, which is not typical.
Right. So not only is it a standout for Carpenter, but then it's also a standout for the genre of science fiction. So once again, like here's John Carpenter, like we're saying maybe this isn't like his biggest success, but even in his, not biggest success, he's able to bring in an award that is very seldomly held in a genre like science fiction, and is able to make something that is a critical success. You mentioned E.T. though, right? So did you do that for a specific reason? Did you mention E.T. for a specific reason, or you were just...
Well, because E.T. was a humongous success, and it is in many ways an optimistic alien film where, it's, I mean, don't get me wrong, E.T. goes through some terrible things, and it is very, very traumatic for a little while at the end there. But ultimately, he gets back to his ship, he gets back to his people, and that's, not to jump all the way to the end, that is what happens as well in this movie. So it feels like was maybe Carpenter's thing to go, okay, I get it. We'll make one of these in the Hollywood style and show them I can do it. And then I can make my They Live where I'm like, yes, screw everybody. And that will let me kind of back and forth go. But the movie didn't make enough to make that path necessarily work for him the way it has for others.
And apparently at the time, both of those scripts, there was a time when both of those scripts were floating around. The Starman script as well as the E.T. script was floating around. And apparently Spielberg was given a choice or given an option to choose between the two. And that for me, like you talk about like alternate bizarro dimensions.
What would a Carpenter E.T. even look like?
Well, yes. Yeah. Like that to me though, like that, I feel like that if that could be done, that would be amazing. But then also I was like, what would a Spielberg Starman look like? And don't you almost feel like, well, I feel like both of them are very Spielberg-ish movies. Like I feel like Carpenter,
I don't think Spielberg's Starman would be much different than what we got. It would be very similar to me.
I agree with that. But Carpenter's E.T. would have been...
Oh, no. E.T. probably would not have survived Or E.T. would have given, what was the kid's name? Oh, God. Something phone home. What is his name? What is the kid's name?
Elliot.
Yeah, Elliot.
I was trying to do it in the voice, that Elliot.
I'm not the biggest fan of E.T., so I don't remember. I was never
really?
a fan. Even as a kid, E.T. always kind of just never
fan.
landed for me. I mean, the alien looked neat, but that was about it.
Yeah, I loved it.
But the thing was, in Carpenter's, E.T. would have passed on some horrible disease, and Elliot would have died 3 weeks after he left the planet.
Yeah,
the kid would have died
a kid would have got hurt. Because Carpenter,
like,
a kid would.
The guy would have shot E.T. while the bike was in the air, and they would have crashed horribly, and the kid would have had 2 broken legs and a collapsed lung.
E.T. would have been. You know what I think he would have done? Like E.T. would have been like hideous. So like where he's kind of in the Spielberg.
Because we get a little bit of a horrific scene in this movie at the beginning, so it wouldn't shock me if he made E.T. not so friendly looking.
Absolutely. So apparently both of those scripts were kind of floating around, and Spielberg picked E.T., and of course that's what happened there. But this script was also here for the taking, and I guess at the time Michael Douglas was trying to find the right director for it, and like we said, for whatever reason, whether it was to prove it or to be a big middle finger to Hollywood, Carpenter directed the film.
Interestingly, this movie came out the same week as 2 other films that I actually love, which is David Lynch's Dune and Peter Hyam's 2010, The Year We Made Contact. And all 3 are actually optimistic films, which is especially the David Lynch Dune. That is just for a very, very quick aside, because I've talked endlessly about how much I love Dune. But yes, I know the Dune book does not have an optimistic ending, so I get it. That's why people hate it. If you're a purist, you're not going to like David Lynch's Dune. But if you adore art and expression of visual poetry, then you must love Dune. You must put aside your adherence to the book and embrace what is got to be the most singular Dune you will ever see in your entire life. And 2010 is a lot of fun too, and they're all optimistic alien films. I mean, Dune is not technically alien, but they are aliens.
Wow.
So interesting that those 3 movies all came out at the same time, and they are all kind of optimistic endings. Whatever the real reason.
So you keep saying this is an optimistic movie, and I appreciate your opinion, first of all. But second of all, I'm not sure this movie. I think the writing in this movie, I think it sets up like an E.T., and it looks very much like an E.T. I mean, there's the government, there's the scientist who changes his mind, and then there's sort of everybody wrapped up in it, as well as the alien, as well as the human, who they end up forming a really strong bond. This is like the date movie version of E.T. instead of being a kid's movie. But I think this film is actually pretty. I don't know if the ending is uplifting for me. And in general, I feel like the movie is it's less about this like kind of amazing. It could be a road movie. It could be an adventure movie. It could be a rediscovering yourself by connecting to other worlds. But I really just think at the end of the day, this movie is about grief.
Well, okay. So when I say optimistic, I want to, because there are deeply dark aspects of this movie, which we will cover, because especially the ending, where I just said optimistic, there is also a crushingly despairing aspect to the ending, which we will get to. But what I mean is, in terms of the alien lives and goes home, whereas in a typical Carpenter film, like, say, The Thing, the alien is not necessarily either benevolent nor able to escape. I mean, because there is a segment of opinion that The Thing, the alien, is just trying to survive, and these humans keep screwing with it. So yes, while I say optimistic, what I mean is the general audience read of this is, you know what? She discovered that she can love again, and he got to go home. Like, that's how the superficial read
You're
is.
right. It's not two guys sitting in a destroyed, Antarctic
Let's just see what happens.
Facility. Let's just wait and see. It's just like sipping out a bottle. Happens. You're right. I guess that's a little less uplifting than
when you're coming off The Thing 2 years later and you watch this, you're like, wow, life's a party, baby. So
In Carpenter's world, this is for
the guy who made The Thing, Prince of Darkness. I mean, this is a celebration of life compared to those movies where it's just like, you know what? Yeah. There's no point. There's never a point. There never will be a point. It's like, hey, at least Jeff Bridges got out. You know, the rest of you are screwed, but he got out. So let's get into the movie because there is a lot to talk about inside this movie. So movie starts out and we see, as you said, the Voyager 2 spacecraft is encountered by a large alien craft, which appears to be essentially a silvery Saturn with even the ring around it of some kind of debris or whatever. It's some kind of spaceship. We never, thankfully, see inside it. We never see what the aliens actually look like. We know nothing. As far as we know, they are just beings of energy. So it encounters the Voyager craft. We hear some of the audio from it that's on there with the greetings and some of the music. And, you know, we invite you in peace to come to Earth. And so the spacecraft dispatches a little orbiter or whatever, a single-person vehicle, it seems like, that enters Earth's atmosphere and is immediately shot at by Army fighters or Navy fighters. The craft is downed nearby a house where it just so happens that Karen Allen is a grieving widow whose husband died. She says months. I don't remember if she says the exact number, but it's less than a year. Had died a relatively short time ago, and she is clearly in miserable grief. She's watching home movies of them. I believe she's drinking while she's watching them. She is clearly not over the fact that her husband died, and she just says an accident. They never say what kind, so we don't really know, but I would infer a car accident just generally, but something that was obviously a surprise. He wasn't sick. It wasn't something expected. This was some kind of random event where suddenly he was killed. And so the alien being comes into her home and is looking through her photo album and discovers a lock of hair from her husband, whose name was Scott, and begins to map itself into Scott. So we get a very almost different type of, again, tonally different scene where, what is the woman's name? I can't remember Karen Allen's, oh God, what is her name? It's Scott, and what is the woman's name? Jeez. Jenny Hayden. Yeah. I should have remembered Jenny Hayden. Yeah. Because, if you want to see Jeff Bridges talk like a robot or a very alien way, you found your movie. So Jenny comes out and sees this being form from essentially a fetus up into an adult man right in front of her eyes. And
right there, you're like, this is a Carpenter film. If you were prior to that, if you were like, is this, who's directing this? At that point, you're like, this is a Carpenter film with those creature effects.
The lighting, everything feels like it's the thing. It all, like if it was just a blue tint and it was cold, this would seem like a scene from the thing that got cut. So the creature grows to adulthood and essentially kidnaps Jenny to bring him back to a crater in Arizona where his craft is going to meet him in 3 days. And honestly, in some ways, the movie is very easy to talk about because it's a 3-day road movie where Jenny and the Alien, that should be the subtitle, Jenny and the Alien, sounds like a Talking Heads album, Jenny and the Alien. Jenny and the Alien, or Devo maybe. But so Jenny and the Alien are going from, is it Colorado? Well, no, is it, where are they? I don't
Wisconsin.
remember where they start. Wisconsin, that's right. Milwaukee is what I was thinking of, so that's it. So they are driving from Wisconsin to Arizona. And in between that, we have the government, who clearly knows an alien has landed, is basically chasing after them to, you would assume, capture and dissect him. And that's really what the movie is. It is a road film with a widow and an alien. And that's basically what the movie is. But obviously there's way more to it. I've captured twice the clips for this movie that I captured for Halloween 3. So it's not, there's nothing to say. But honestly, in terms of what happens, that's what it is. It is a 3-day road movie. And one of the reasons it is that is because Carpenter wanted to, he said, show places across America, these beautiful spaces of the country. And so it is specifically filmed with these really wonderful backdrops where they're on location. They're not shooting on a set. They're not shooting on a green screen. They're out in these places filming so people can see this beautiful part of the country as they drive through the middle of it. So
and that adds to the budget right there. You know, the fact that they're not on sound stages and that they're, you know, on location to these different places throughout the Midwest to the West. You know, that will, you know, that could be several millions right there added into the budget.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And Carpenter has said that what he really wanted to get out of this movie, because as you said, there were multiple versions, including ones apparently that had heavy political elements and more science fiction elements. And what Carpenter said he wanted to do was really emphasize the relationship between these two individuals as they go on this journey and they become more, you know, they understand each other better. But let's go through the film though, because there's lots of, I think, important audio in here that tells kind of a sub story. So we get the crash, and we get the introduction of what I called SETI guy. What is his actual name? Scott, I think. Is that his actual name? I should get the character's name right. Mark Sherman. Mark Sherman. So Mark Sherman, and it's here again. We get these little Carpenter-esque moments, as you said. There are things buried inside what could be seen as a happy road film. So immediately, when Mark Sherman shows up at the crashed meteor, what they think is a meteorite, he has an exchange, and there's some important information that's communicated in that exchange between himself and, I assume, somebody from the government who was sent out. I mean, they never really talk about it, but I think that person is supposed to be an Army Corps engineer or something. But we get this little bit of dialogue about the meteorite and who Mark Sherman is.
You attached to national security? Not very. I just work for them. On loan. Sort of like a library book. Actually, I'm with SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Oh, so they're sending you guys out of meteorites now, huh?
Well, only when they change course.
Change course? Can they do that?
Well, this one did, until they tell me. Twice. Either that or some airhead over at NORAD misread a glitch on his monitor. Also came down slower than suborbital speed. So naturally, they decided to fire some missiles at it.
Right, so several little things that we get right away in this exchange. One, that he's working for the NSA but doesn't seem to be all that thrilled about it, and reemphasizes that the fact that something came down and we immediately shot at it, which again, right there. Yeah,
and definitely, you know, later films we're going to look at this sort of skepticism gets just increased, but this is something, you know, we even saw back in Precinct 13. You know, as well as Escape from New York, this idea that the established sort of authority, there's always these characters in Carpenter's movies that are either questioning it or don't believe in it or are sort of living outside of it.
So we get a scene where we see the alien, who we'll just call Scott, or Scalien, or whatever we want to call him, Alien Scott, who uses these little spheres. He has little silver spheres, and he uses one of them to send a message to his people, and that's where they set up the rendezvous to pick him up in 3 days. And throughout the movie, he will use these spheres, except for one, which gets saved for the very end. And so initially, of course, Jenny, as you would expect, is terrified of him, doesn't know what he is, and is constantly trying to escape or get help as they're driving, because he basically tells her to drive, but he's also studying her. So he's trying to see what makes humans do what they do. So because she asks him if he can speak English, and he kind of indicates, well, I only have so much. Now, he never comes out and says, I only know what the record told me. But basically what we're made to know from some later information, and I'll have a clip of that, but is that his vocabulary, at least in the start, is informed by the record. So this is an alien who is going off of the record itself. And his entire approach in the movie is basically what the alien, what the record said. Come here and we welcome you in peace and we can learn from each other. Well, that's what he's trying to do. And what he experiences almost universally, especially in the first half of the film, is hostility. Hostility of various flavors, but hostility from this planet that he's coming to visit. So, like you said, there is that dark Carpenter-esque undertone to the whole movie, and it really never leaves entirely, but it gets softened or changed, in particular with Jenny. And Mark always comes across as the optimist, the positive person who doesn't want anything other than to meet this being. So that's what I mean about right away, they establish that he is not part of the NSA. And for anybody who may not live in the United States, the NSA is a branch of the government that is seen as, it many times is portrayed, whether fairly or not, is up for debate, as a particularly ruthless branch of the law enforcement apparatus in the United States. I think that's a fair way to categorize it.
Absolutely. And, once again, we were talking in Assault on Precinct 13, when we were talking about Bishop and, knowing that he is a police officer, right? He's a lieutenant, but that he's somehow different than the other cops that we've seen so far in the movie, even just in the fact that all the other cops seem to be wearing all black. And here's Mark Sherman. He's not wearing a military uniform or really a uniform of any type. He just seems to be in civilian clothing. And he's interacting with all these people who are from, have military style clothing on.
Right. So, and every encounter we get of anybody in the government or law enforcement apparatus that is not Mark is openly hostile, not just to the alien, but also at one point will end up wounding Jenny. So there is this constant kind of threat from any official conduit that isn't Mark Sherman. He is constantly portrayed as, no, I have no sinister intent. My goal is to learn and to actually the kind of noble idea of scientific first contact, to try to understand each other and not, deconstruct him and figure out how he works or whatever. And so they go on the road, and there's a point where Jenny tries to escape, and we see that the alien will use his magical spheres in a defensive manner, and that then alerts the authorities that they're on the road, because at first they don't really know what's going on. They know they have a ship, but they don't really know if there was an alien in it or if he survived. But because of this encounter, Mark Sherman had said to the pilot that is with him through a lot of the movie to keep an eye out if you hear anything weird on any of the police bands or anything else. And of course this comes up because they then discover that there is a person traveling with Jenny that looks an awful lot like her dead husband. But before we get to kind of a critical scene in the middle where they basically Mark is explaining his theory on what's going on, this is just purely an audio thing that I noticed. Because there's a point where, as I said, the alien is watching Jenny, and there's a very specific scene where she runs a yellow light, and she does it by gunning the engine to run the yellow light, which is a very human thing. And so the alien is driving at one point and mimics the behavior in what is supposed to be a comedic scene. And I noticed something. I'm going to play 3 pieces of audio. So I'm going to play... And I want to see if you'll know. So here's the first one. Just listen to this. This is Karen Allen reacting to his driving. I believe this is the Karen. No, I'm sorry. This is Karen Allen in one form or another. But let's listen to this one.
Okay, are you crazy?
Okay, so there's that bit of audio. Now listen to this bit of audio.
Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Now that second bit of audio, you know where that's from.
Indiana Jones. Yes.
Yes.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Unless you think I'm being crazy, I blended them together.
Okay, are you crazy?
Yeah, nearly the same delivery of the same line, which it was just something that I was like, oh, this is exactly how she said it in Raiders, because that's a great scene where he's basically about to save her, and there's like, oh, no, I need you to stay captured so that the Nazis don't come after me until I get the Ark, which is what a great movie.
Remember, if Lucas or Spielberg actually didn't pick E.T., then that that makes it even weirder, doesn't it?
Can you imagine?
Yeah. Which, by the way, might have been part of the reason why it was pitched to Spielberg and or Lucas, because, even they may have already had the cast sort of in place, and it's like, oh, you've worked with this actress before, and yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you read, one thing is just an aside for anybody who has any interest in film. There are lots of wonderful books about all the different paths. I'm reading one now on Dune. Speaking of Dune, I'm reading this book that just came out about the background, the oral history of Dune, and just the route that movie took to get to David Lynch, and why David Lynch took it when he was almost going to do Return of the Jedi, which I would cut off a finger to see probably, because what would that have been? There's many stories. The way that movies get made is almost never a straight line. It is often many weird dead ends that you sit there and go, wow, what if Tom Selleck had been in Raiders of the Lost Ark instead of Harrison Ford?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
So that is, there's so much of that in filmmaking. It's one of the most fascinating parts of it.
And I think there's a lot of people thinking about these decisions because often there is so much money involved and it's such a big budget. So this real push to like get it right and to get the hit and to have it, cost, one price and then, gross just in the box office, 3 times that. Like there's always been a strong push for that. I think with music, it hasn't been until the last 20, 30 years that the idea that the album has to be really, really successful for it to even be worth doing. I think in this time in the 70s, the 80s, there were still a lot of albums that did make a lot of money. And that was okay. But prior to that, I mean, the film industry was always very first and foremost a business that cost a lot of money to produce films and needed to make a lot of money to make it worth everyone's while.
Yeah, this is about the time where the experimentation in filmmaking was really starting to die out, where it was becoming less of let's just see if we can make something weird, which really was the 70s was a major thing where you could just almost make anything. And now we started to get towards, and you can factor this into the politics and the way things were going at the time, but where it was more about, well, this has to be a business and we have to make money. If it doesn't reach X amount of dollars, then it's not worth anything and we don't care, which unfortunately has continued largely on in a lot of ways in terms of major studio productions.
Well,
but anyway, back to our film.
Yeah, I mean, now it's either it's a superhero movie or it's a Christopher Nolan film. I feel like
it's a remake, or it's a remake that doesn't understand anything about the original.
Or it's a remake. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe that'll end sometime soon. We can hope. We can have some optimism. Who knows?
Maybe there'll be a renaissance. Yeah,
could be. So then we get to the point where, as I said, now the NSA and Mark Sherman have determined that this alien exists, and we get an explanation as to their theory. And I think you get a very clear sense of the difference between, as we said, Mark Sherman's point of view and the NSA's point of view. So I'll play this little clip here where they're talking about how to tell the president that there's an alien running around from a crashed meteorite.
Do you seriously expect me to tell the president that an alien has landed, assumed the identity of a dead house painter from Madison, Wisconsin, and is presently out tooling around the countryside in a hopped-up, orange and black 1977 Mustang?
We have the following givens. Look, that man, Scott Hayden, died last April. He's dead and buried. That's verified. He has no brothers, no look-alike cousins, but still this morning at approximately 6 o'clock...
All right, we have been through all of that. I'm going to ask you now, how could it happen?
We think it might be some kind of a cloning deal. Replication of an entire organism from a single cell.
We found some hairs from Scott Hayden's head.
But is that possible? I mean, can you clone a living organism from the hair of a dead man?
Well, human hair consists of keratinized cells, although I suppose in order to determine whether replication was possible, you'd have to...
I asked you a question.
You mean us? In our present state of technology?
Yes.
No.
Well, what the hell are we talking about?
We're hypothesizing a technology that's probably 100,000 years ahead of us. We're the ancients, Mr. Fox.
Ancients?
Technologically, yes. We've just started.
Yeah, but even if you're right, I still have problems. I mean, his knowledge of English.
Okay, listen to this. I helped put this package together, you know. This was designed so that an intelligent species could get a working knowledge of English. Enough to get by, anyhow. A couple 100-word vocabulary, a rough idea of syntax. Think of what it would mean to talk to a being from a civilization like that. Think of what we could learn.
147 member states who represent almost all of the human inhabitants of the planet Earth. I send greetings.
Greetings, there. See, that's what he said to Heinmuller out on the road.
It is also what the cannibal said to the missionary just before he ate him.
Yeah, well, the question in this case is, who was the missionary and who were the cannibals?
And this scene is such an excellent, the two viewpoints. Mark Sherman, enthusiastic, almost childlike. Oh, what we could learn, what we could, that we put this together to get them to come here and talk to us. And of course, the NSA guy is talking about, well, how am I supposed to explain this? Well, what is the threat? Even the way the lines are delivered are so vastly different and just inform where just listening to this, no visuals, you know exactly what these two people are, even how they would be dressed, which is how they're dressed. You can tell just from the way it's delivered.
Yeah, but I feel like, and this is just my opinion, I feel like they're really one-dimensional. Like, it's the science guy versus the government guy, and the government guy is about, his career and security, and the science guy is about the wonder of science. And I feel like, that character we see again, both of those characters, we see them again and again, almost ad nauseum in most of these like science fiction films, where it's represented. And, it's interesting though, and it sets the stage for the movie, but I really don't think the movie has anything to do with that. I feel like that is almost like the window dressing on a movie really about the relationship between Karen Allen, or Jenny, and Scott. And both Scott, who's dead, as well as, Scott the alien, who is learning what it means to be human. And, it gives me a vibe more of like, The Fifth Element, where, our lead character, she finds out about how just kind of awful humans have been over time. And she gets, really, despaired by that and kind of loses hope. And I think for me that any of these scenes with like Sherman and with Fox, they just I knew inevitably, like from the get-go, you're like, okay, at some point this guy's going to jump ship and, betray, the government, or he's going to stick up for the alien. Like, you just knew that was going to happen. And for me, I think the real interest was in these scenes where, you kind of have Bridges and Allen interacting, and there's like this weird, like, kind of helping an alien learn to be more human, an alien learning about the good parts about being a human bad. And then there's also this just like weird, like, this is a grieving widow, and that brings this whole like kind of darkness and seriousness to it. So I always just like, and this is just my opinion, I don't mean to like, shoot anything down, but I always just felt like those scenes with Sherman and Fox, though they were very Carpenter-esque, because that's like, he's going to have that sort of angle, those always just felt like, okay, I'm waiting to get back to our two characters who are starting to, and especially at this point, starting to form a relationship. If it's not just her being kidnapped, which it is for like the first part of the movie.
So two things. One, a quick aside, which is when you started talking about The Fifth Element, I started to lean back because I thought, I hope he's not going to tell me he doesn't like The Fifth Element, because that is one of my most favorite movies, because Mila Jovovich is in it, and I will watch anything that she's in, even if she's reading paint instructions. Anytime, anywhere, anything. Hell, I watched 45, and that is not a fun movie, but that's a separate conversation.
I don't know.
So, boy, it's a very authentic portrayal of abuse. I'll say that. And that's why it's very hard to watch. But, man, if anybody says she can't act, I push them right to that movie and say, yeah, go watch that and then come back and talk to me. Anyway, back to this. I completely agree. I think that these characters are the necessary things, because otherwise you can't propose a movie where it's two people bonding in a car. You can't sell that. So there has to be something that drives it. That's why.
And I wonder if we didn't have this whole plot kind of going around him, and we didn't have this urgency that he has to get back, I wonder if we would just kind of get lost in the countryside, and in the scenery, where we know now there's people putting the pieces together, and they're eventually going to find him. And he does have a limited time. Scott has a limited time. The alien has a limited time to get back to Arizona to meet up with the spaceship. So there is that ticking clock. But I think this is also important too, because not only is there a ticking clock, but if he doesn't make it, it's not as if he could just hide in plain sight, and be sort of a surrogate husband to Jenny. It's clear that if he stays, I think they say he's going to be vivisected. So, which does not sound pleasant.
No, what I think that and even in that dialogue, and I think it's a clever little bit where he starts to explain something. And the guy's like, yeah, we know what the explanation is. Because again, in the conventional movie, you have to have somebody that explains everything beginning to end. He's like, yeah, we got it. Let's jump ahead of that. So it's almost like a Carpenter note where he's like, yeah, we're going to cut that right off because I only want to spend so much time with these characters, so let's not waste more than we have to. But it does feel like it is what a good portion of an audience expects from this movie. There has to be this element. It can't just be two people, particularly one exploring what grief is. You can't make that movie and put a tagline to it, Starman, 2 hours of exploring grief. Like, you can't just put that out at Christmas, right? You can't.
That sounds fun. It's a great date movie. Yeah.
I mean, basically, Spielberg did do it with Schindler's List, but it's not like people remember that as a fun time. Necessary, right, but not fun.
Right, but that was like an important film, so like people would say, okay, I'm going to go and sit in that because it's going to, it's an important part of history. I think coming back to this film, though, I do like how the George Fox, the military or government component, he just like doesn't even care. He doesn't even care about what the scientist is sort of hypothesizing. And I think, this happens to me all the time as somebody who's into audio. And, I do a fair amount of time, like sometimes talking to like PR people or talking to administrators, like people who are not either creative or musicians. That doesn't mean they're not great people and like are super helpful to the process. But sometimes if I get going about some cool audio thing or some sort of deep aspect of it, like the joy and the love of it and the art of it, I watch those people's faces just kind of glaze over, and they're just kind of like, okay, but we need to get to the important part, or the part that is about the X's and O's. And I think that's clearly what's happening here. Is he's like, how am I going to explain this to my boss? And how is this going to affect my career and that type of thing? And it's and this is just the classic scientist for science sake, where he just is. He doesn't make decisions on patriotism or right or wrong. He makes them based on discovery.
Right. No, they are definitely very, as you said, one-dimensional and kind of, okay, we understand exactly who these people are because they have a purpose in the story, which is to keep things moving. So, yeah, I agree. And
well,
the reason...
in Close Encounters, in that film, you have that same character. You have the scientist who's for science sake, and in that film, it's much more nuanced about, he is both the government person, but he's also in sort of awe of connecting to, beings from another planet, and just the joy of discovery, or the sort of discovery sense that's behind any scientist. And so like what I'm saying, when I'm seeing it in this film, it feels like a Close Encounters. It feels very. It feels like a cheaper version of that.
Yeah, I was going to agree and say that Close Encounters is the better version of this character. That's where you see the more kind of, you get more of the science character, as opposed to, almost anybody could write these particular characters as we get them in the movie. Anybody could write this stuff. It is pretty much the boilerplate version of these characters. And the way that you can very easily see that is not that long after we get a wonderful scene where Jenny has made the decision to try to get away again, but she's going to give the alien the directions, and she's informing him of how, if something happens to her, he will still be able to make it. So she's gone from just trying to escape to now getting to the point of, okay, I don't think this being is evil. I'm not going to stay with the being, but I need to get away from him. And crucially, in this scene, as it comes in, we see that there is a hunter's car with a dead deer that is tied to the hood. And basically, he can't understand what's wrong with the deer. He doesn't get it. But she's basically like, well, let's go get something to eat. And so they go inside, and then we get this exchange where she tries to explain the concept of death to the alien.
It's me and Scott on our honeymoon. A honeymoon is what you call it when two people first get married and they go off together after they've fallen in love.
You find love.
Love is, it's when you care more for someone else than you do for yourself. But it's not just that, it's when someone is a part of you. And when they...
What?
Scott is dead. He was killed in an accident. When someone you love dies. Shit.
Now, honestly, how Karen Allen didn't get nominated for an award, I really don't understand.
Yeah.
You know, because honestly, that scene is... If that scene doesn't make the movie for you, then you might as well just stop watching it at that point. You know, why go on?
Yeah, and you know, her whole like the just the sadness behind, even, you know, at other parts in the movie where it's somewhat silly or there's you know, kind of action happening, she just, like, the entire role, she like carries that dark cloud with her everywhere, which is that sort of grief and, you know, the loss of her husband. I will note out about the music. You mentioned something, and it was really spot on earlier. You were talking about how the theme sort of, we don't really hear it right away. We don't hear the main sort of Starman theme, or I don't know, we can call it the love theme. I call it the relationship theme, because by the end, it's this big, huge thing. And in, you know, in the final scenes, which is, you know, the climax of the movie, we hear it in full bore. But here it's sort of kind of sneaks in the scene and kind of hints in. And, you know, there's a lot of tender moments in this movie. There's a lot of sort of relationship building moments in this movie. And anytime we have some of those scenes, it's when this music, this sort of connection music or relationship music comes in. And each time, you know, it sort of builds and gets bigger and to the end where it's almost like sort of a fanfare, where here it's almost like kind of this subtle sort of like drone music that's happening in the background. On top of, like you said, great. Her wonderful performance. Yep.
Yeah, it is used to such great effect that I don't care that it doesn't really show up in its full, you know, in the full sweep until far in, because you get all the background of it. It's used as punctuation in the right ways. It's used to emphasize as opposed to overpowering the way it does in a lot of movies, where it's just like riding over where you're distracted. Instead, it's just meant to, okay, this is the heart of the movie. This theme is to demonstrate, even if the performance already did, which it does, this is the heart of what this movie is actually about. And that's what I mean about the scene with the scientist, and there's no music. There's nothing. It's just dialogue. Yeah. It's very static and clinical. This is the opposite of that, where it is very intimate. We're close up to them. You know, we're seeing the emotion on each side of it, and even his attempt to understand what's going on. And so
I agree, and I feel like that is the least that is a very un-Carpenter thing. That it's that the music is very sort of subtle and sort of surrounding or kind of hinting at, you know, and storytelling. I feel like, you know, like a Michael Mann or a Carpenter a score is something where the music, and even Christopher Nolan in a way, where it's the music just keeps rolling and scenes come and go, and there's still this sort of kind of theme music or music that's sort of pushing through each scene. This is a very different style of film scoring. It's the bring it in these really soft and subtle ways to kind of accent a scene. And by the way, I'm not putting a value judgment on one or the other. I'm not saying, you know, Carpenter can or doesn't do that. I'm just saying, in general, I feel like with, you know, Carpenter's composition style, it's more of setting up these ostinatos, setting up these repeating things that sort of maintain tension from scene to scene, where here it just, like you mentioned, it just beautifully accents two wonderful performances by two good actors.
And we will see in a movie we'll be discussing in our final part where
Yes.
music is constantly there and is
Yes.
used to wonderful effect by
Oh,
never
yes.
leaving, which is great.
Never
So it
leaving.
definitely
Never
can
leaves
be,
us.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not that there, as you said, there's not a correct way. There
It's
are
a different
just
approach.
incorrect ways that sometimes happen, but it doesn't mean one way or the other is the only way to do it. Absolutely.
But I don't hear those in any of these films, so that's
No.
good. That's good.
They all work in these. So Jenny is about to leave. She actually gives her keys and a wallet to a wallet. I think her credit card to a waitress, and is about to sneak out the back. And the waitress says, "Well, wait a minute. The guy you're with is outside." And she goes and looks, and he is, of course, at the dead deer. And he is, I assume, using one of his spheres. We don't really see it, but that could be the only explanation to bring the deer back to life. And when she sees that, that instantly changes everything in terms of her relationship. She then immediately decides to stay with him, and they in fact have to run because then the hunter of the deer comes out, and they get into a fight, which reminded me of Superman 2 a bit. Where he's beating the crap out of him.
And he's lost his powers, so he can't fight back. And
Right. So then they take off, and then we get a chase scene with the police. And in the chase itself, the police actually shoot, and as far as we can tell, mortally wound Jenny. She's at least very hurt, if not about to die.
Yep.
And so then what the alien does is intentionally crashes their car into a gas tanker that is overturned in the road, and then protects them using one of the spheres or something. I mean, it has to be, again, it creates a shield. And that is where we get the first real use of the Starman theme, which I'm not going to play it now. I'll just play it at the end so we can hear more of it. But that's where we really, I can. Should I play it now?
Sure, let's listen to it.
Yeah, okay. All right. We're not going to listen to the whole thing because it's over 7 minutes long, but this is basically the first time we really hear it in full force. So, yeah, here we go.
Yep. Yeah, just so just a wonderful theme, extremely memorable. And it's funny too, seeing this as, I think, the last time I'd watched this before the summer was as a fairly young kid, maybe early teens, maybe 10 or 11. And I remember the theme. I remember the scene with the deer. That always really resonated with me as a kid. But this music, it's unmistakable. I mean, it's of its time. It's very synth-tastic, right? It's very synthy sounding. But I don't know. That's a pretty melancholy theme. It's not really sort of. It is dramatic, but it's not really this big, exciting theme. It's not a John Williams score. It is very synthesized and kind of these really sweeping melodies. It sounds like a theme from a romance or maybe a tragedy.
Yeah, it's almost too much I think it comes close to the line of being overpowering, and I don't know how else to put it because I can't I can't speak in musical terms, but it's not.
Does it get a little like it almost like the word sleazy or a little bit sappy? Like it almost is.
It comes close to romance novel territory where it's like, this is now a Victorian drama thing where he has swept her up in his arms and they shall win the war and turn the tide of England's whatever favor. I don't care. But it doesn't. It's close to it, and as you say, it has this very sad motion to it. Where it's the same thing for me. It has to be 20-25 years since I've seen this because my parents watched it. I remember my parents watching it. My mom loved it. And I like you said, the deer scene, which still is that the whole the restaurant scene and the deer scene are probably outside of the very, very end the best parts of the movie. The ending is great for a different reason, but that center point where she's talking about what death is and explaining it is just great. And then when he just, of course, resurrects the deer, and it's filmed so wonderfully. It's not over the top. It's not close up. You know right away what's happening. You just see him there. Right. All of it is just perfectly done. And then the music comes in, and the music is just it's great. I'm glad they don't overuse it. I'm actually very happy that it's not constantly right there. I wouldn't want to hear it for the opening credits. It wouldn't make any sense. It would destroy the power of it. It just comes up at the right times.
Well, because I think for the first part of the movie, this is a science fiction kind of like maybe a monster movie. It could be. We don't know yet, but we know there's an alien. It crash lands. We see this really graphic morphing from whatever the energy being is into a person. So it kind of sets this precedent that this is going to be like kind of a John Carpenter creature flick. This is going to be more like The Thing. And then it evolves into it's really just a romance. And it's funny, as a kid when you watch it, I'm more focused on the aspects of like Sherman and Fox and like, is he going to get away in the spaceship? But as an adult now watching it, and as we all have dealt with loss and grief, I just think Nancy's sort of just just like the kind of dark cloud, like I said, she's carrying around. I think you can kind of identify with that, and I think it's really well played.
It is. And so after she is shot and they emerge from the wreck, they manage to escape, and they get into a mobile home that's being towed. And at that point, the alien uses a silver sphere to heal Jenny's wounds, and then leaves and basically starts to go back to try to get towards the crater without her. And she manages to catch up with him at a roadblock. That scene, the scene where she's in the diner and just finds a guy to take her to the roadblock. I'm like, wow, boy, you're taking a risk, lady.
No, I feel like that is the most 80s part or 70s or 80s part of this movie, that like you could just do that. You could like run into a diner and be like, hey, can somebody give me a ride? I got to go somewhere. And some like gentleman would help you.
Yeah, a gentleman and not a guy who's like, yeah, sure, I know where I can take you, lady.
Well, you know what's weird about that is like, we talk about all the activity of like serial killers and how prevalent it was in like the 70s and 80s. Well, part of that is probably because, women were going into, there wasn't the conversations that, mothers were having with daughters or even children to be like, hey, maybe, don't go with strange people, like stranger danger. And also, you've got to protect yourself out there. So I felt like that wasn't just like a plot hole. I feel like that was very much of the time that you could run into a restaurant and find somebody find the short order cook who will give you a ride to the next rest stop. Or to the next
would not
location.
play today, but you're right. At this point, that was still probably happening. So she manages to catch up with him, and they now start to hitchhike together, and we get an explanation of the concept of leaving, and also a plot point about Jenny and some plans she had with Scott. So I'll play that audio now.
I wake up alone, you're gone. Not a word, nothing.
You were right. To be with me is not good for your health.
You could have at least told me where you were going, said goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. don't know it.
Teach me this.
Well, I don't know. It's a custom. It's how you tell somebody that you miss them, that you wish them well, that you hope.
Her tooth coming in. Pobrecito.
Can anyone have babies?
Just women.
I understand the reproductive process as you know it.
As we know it.
You have a baby?
No. No babies.
Why not?
Scott and I wanted to have a baby. It just turned out I couldn't.
And of course, this is an important plot point.
Right.
Where,
and
we know where this is going.
Yeah. And this is probably my least favorite part of the movie is where, she can't have babies. And then, of course, I'm sure you'll reveal it here that the Starman gets his groove on. And do
I even need to reveal it? It's so obvious where the movie's going.
Yeah, where it's going. But, the step before that about explaining what a goodbye is and,
that's
talking.
Great.
Yeah. And talking about the abrupt way in which Scott, we don't know what happened to him. There was some type of accident so that we know Scott didn't get to say goodbye. Right. So I feel like that's a really powerful part of that scene where she's like kind of almost in a way getting to say goodbye to Scott, which is kind of, where this movie is going is kind of, dealing with, how to say goodbye. But yeah, and then at this point, I feel like it goes beyond so there's like, we're as far from science fiction as possible. And we're almost like entering sort of kind of melodrama and like immaculate conception and other things going on here. So it gets I think it goes a step too far at this point. You take the good with the bad, I guess.
Well, it is a wonderful contrast because even without seeing it, you can hear in her voice the pain of, oh, you just left, because it's not explicit. She doesn't say you just left. Well, Scott just left me too. She doesn't have to say that.
No. She was talking to Scott. She was talking to Scott because she is talking to Scott. And that's the thing I feel like there's like a level of torment that she's going through because she keeps looking at Scott. Like we're seeing it as Jeff Bridges as an alien, but she's seeing it as throughout the entire movie, she's seeing this person as the man who died and she didn't get to say goodbye to. And until about, a day or two ago, she was grieving and considering the concept that she would be living the rest of her life without him. And then all of a sudden he shows back up. So that in itself is messed up.
Oh yeah. There is a humongously disturbing undertone of this whole movie, which we'll talk about when we get to the ending because there's a lot of it there. But so yes, as you said and alluded to, as if any illusion was necessary, they have an intimate night together on a boxcar, and sure enough, I guarantee you are now pregnant, because he basically says, "Hey, I put a baby in you. If you don't want it, I can nuke it, but if you want it, then we'll leave it there."
And I just felt like this was like a
so
weird
many problems with that.
Yeah, and I just felt like it was a weird way to bring abortion into the movie, and just like it just felt like I felt like the writers were just like kind of getting a little carried away here. I feel like an edit needed to happen and be like, maybe it could be a more subtle aspect that she was pregnant, or at least don't foreshadow it in the scene before, have them do it, and then the scene right after be like, oh, by the way, you're pregnant now. Let's go to a casino.
Yeah, it's clumsily handled. Because I don't even mind the thing about I can take it away, because that's what an alien would say. An alien without understanding would say it in that very. But the problem is, it's done. You're right. The editing does seem. The problem is it happens so quickly. right? We get
Yeah.
the discussion
Yeah.
on the truck, then we get the sex scene, then we get, oh, you have a baby, but I can just end it if you'd like me to. I just told you this 5 seconds ago, so what's your opinion on that? Should we get rid of it? Just make a decision. Is this a big deal? Like, it's just...
Yeah. Yeah. And like an alien doesn't understand the morality of abortion, or, you know, like it's just like, it felt
Right.
like,
If
let's
she
put
had
this in here too, you know.
The way to do something like that is that she has this reaction that he misreads. And what a reaction is, that I can't believe that, you know, I got used to this never happening and you've done this. But he misreads it as, no, I don't want this. And if you do that right, it makes sense. But it's so friggin' matter of fact the way he just belts out, well, I put it in you and I can take it right back out. So you want to flip a coin, or, you know, what are we doing here? You know, it's it was quick.
You know, part of what we talked about with Halloween 3, you know, sometimes the pacing is, you know, just how like the two main characters, they've only known each other for 48 hours and they're sleeping together. Like, there's this idea of pacing. And, you know, one of the things I said about Escape from New York, how lean and how just the pacing was just so perfect in that, and just the way one thing leads to the next. It's a wonderful script and it's very, very tight. And I feel like for the most part, Starman is pretty good and as a kind of tight trajectory. But this part here, I was like, I feel like it's almost like the theme music where we're getting on the border of kind of just being sappy and a little bit too much. But luckily, we bounce back and we kind of get back into the race to get to Arizona.
Yes, so we get back on the road and they're on their way in the car again. Now everything is back to normal. And then they stop off and are spotted by the police. And they stop off. And this is I have a couple of clips for this because there's a conversation they have in the car, which I'm going to play. And then I'm going to follow it up because I want to set this up a little bit. So we're going to hear this conversation where she asks him about his home planet. And then the significant thing is they stop off right after, and there's a particular word that I keyed in on him, which is the word civilized. And so they have this conversation, this word comes up, and then they pull off at a Native American diner and gift shop. And so that word becomes important, and I'll play a clip after, but let me play. This is the one of them in the car, and like I said, just listen to that, and this word comes into it, so I'll play it here.
We ought to be coming to the crater any time now. You're gonna make it. You're gonna go home. You want to, don't you?
Yes, of course.
What's it like up there?
It is beautiful. Not like this, but it is beautiful. There is only one language, one law, one people. And there is no war, no hunger. The strong do not victimize the helpless. We are very civilized, but we have lost something, I think. You are all so much alive, all so different. I will miss the cooks and the singing and the dancing and the eating.
So, tremendous little bit of dialogue there where he's talking about the planet and what's good and bad about it. But in particular, he says the thing about, you know, we are very civilized, but we've lost something. And when I heard that, my mind jumped back to an episode of The West Wing, of all things. And there's an episode of that show where a pair of Native Americans come to the White House because they've basically been screwed over the 900,000th time by the government on something. And there's a bit of dialogue, and I'm going to play it here because the word civilized comes up again. And I happen to think of it just because of the dialogue from Starman and where they end up, and then I thought of this.
What tribe are you from?
We're Stockbridge Munsee Indians. Like Maggie was saying, when we were moved to Wisconsin, we signed the Treaty of 1856. In return, the government was supposed to protect our reservations, provide education and health care, and we would still be a sovereign nation. But then the Dawes Act came.
You were forced to sell the land?
We went from 46,000 acres of tribal land to 11,000. The Dawes Act was also supposed to civilize us. Henry Dawes said, to be civilized, you must cultivate the land, wear civilized clothes, drive Studebaker wagons, and drink whiskey.
The drinking part was particularly constructive advice.
And I don't know why my mind just jumped to that and made that association, but it did. I didn't even realize that they said they were from Wisconsin and this movie starts in Wisconsin. I just heard that, which was another, I don't know, you can associate whatever you want to that, but there was something that fired in my brain where I went, whoa, civilized. Because we've civilized, but we've lost something. And I thought about that dialogue about how to be made to be civilized meant you lose your culture, you lose your land, you lose your entire history because you have to be civilized now.
Yeah, and I think it's really emblematic of the time. So it's the 1980s, and it's Reagan, and it's Born in the USA. That song is very anti-USA if you actually listen to the lyrics.
I love that people don't know that. I love that people don't get that.
Yeah, and they would play it at campaign rallies and stuff like that. And it's like, he's talking about not really about the American dream here, sort of the opposite. But anyways, that was kind of the time, like a big, very patriotic, very time, height of the Cold War. So I feel like that's almost like, Scott's character, or the Scalian or alien, is basically talking about a way, I feel like a way an American would talk about America. Like we're just so like rich, and like, we just like have like this great land, and we have all this freedom or whatever, and it's beautiful, but we've lost something. Right. And so I think in a way it was sort of kind of connect with the zeitgeist of that time of just sort of, how people were feeling patriotic about and pride in being American and from America. So I think there's that and that too. I think we're also working our way up to, which I think is a clip you're probably going to play here in a little bit, to a conversation that is then kind of continued later on with Sherman. And I assume you're probably going to play
I
a
have
little bit
the
of
clip
that as
labeled
well.
Diner Conversation, so I assume that's what you mean.
Absolutely.
Right. So they pull into this diner, and then they are basically cordoned off by the police, who apparently don't know what they look like. They just know they're driving the car, because otherwise this whole ending doesn't work. And so,
Remember, it was before the internet. It was before the internet. So
these are very simultaneously follow orders cops, but trusting of a random person who doesn't look like an authority of any kind at the same time. You just got to kind of let some of these things go. But yeah, we're going to have this conversation.
I think he does flash his bag. Well,
he does, but at the same time, I don't know that a cop would simply say, yeah, we'll not wait for the other guy who's your superior to show up. You know what I mean? Maybe, but the cop didn't seem like much of a hippie type is all I'm saying. So I don't know that he'd go along with this the feel-good SETI guy. So yeah, let's play this, and then then I have a bit of an opinion about this entire conversation, but let's play it first.
Great.
I'm Mark Sherman. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial. Mrs. Hayden, we talked on the phone. This is just such a... Do you mind if I sit down? There are so many questions that I'd like to ask you. I hardly even know where to begin. Is there anything I can do for you?
You can let him go.
I can't. Really, I can't. I'm sorry. Are you supposed to meet someone here? Is that it?
Yes.
You don't understand. There isn't much time, please.
Why here? Why the crater? Have people from your world been here before?
Before, yes. We are interested in your species.
You mean some kind of an anthropologist? Is that what you're doing here? Just checking us out?
You are a strange species. Not like any other. And you would be surprised how many there are. Intelligent but savage. Shall I tell you what I find beautiful about you? You are at your very best when things are worst.
Now, I got to tell you, that last line doesn't feel like it belongs in a Carpenter movie at all.
No.
It's so alien to what his messaging usually is. It sticks out almost like the baby thing where I'm like, whoa, it's obvious he didn't write this movie.
No. And I almost feel like it's from another movie. You know what I mean?
It comes out of, all they've been is merciless to him except for Jenny, really.
Yeah. But he, I feel like, is this I say it kind of sounds cliche, but I'm like, is this the movie in which I'm referencing it as cliche? Because I feel like there's many movies later on in the 80s and 90s that have this idea about, even the speech in The Matrix, the classic Agent Smith speech to Morpheus when he's, trying to break him, talking about, how, that, humans are a disease. It feels like that feels more like the Carpenter.
Yeah, where he's like, we
vibe.
tried to make a perfect version, right? And you kept failing because you guys just can't be happy. You're all miserable.
Yeah. And you're like a disease, like where other animals coexist in their ecosystem, you don't. So maybe that's why when I heard this, it felt cliche, because I feel like it's like the different take, the opposite take of the Matrix, which is, that's a fantastic scene. So I wonder if, that it just feels very un-Carpenter. And I think from that point on, then too, we don't really get any Carpenter moments. We're not setting up to have a Carpenter ending where we're kind of let down, or it's a cliffhanger, or two guys sitting in the snow saying, let's wait and see, as the base burns around them. I think we're setting ourselves up for a very un-Carpenter ending.
Yeah, I mean, I would not be shocked if I had read somewhere, which I didn't, but if there was a thing where somebody said, it's funny because John was sick that day and wasn't on set, so we had to have the second unit film it. Yeah, because he was throwing up in the trailer because he couldn't stand it. He couldn't bear this dialogue. Yeah, it definitely, that part. And I like, there's a lot of what. And it's interesting, too, because it's from one of these stock characters we're talking about. So it's almost as if the presence of the stock character introduces a stock response. Like you can't, once you break away from Jenny and the alien, it immediately isn't as interesting. It's just not as good.
Because it's not supposed to be a commentary on humanity. It is. That's wrapped in there, that it's like, what does it mean to be a human, right? And so Jenny is teaching the alien how to be human, or what it means. So that's how they form a bond. But that's not really the most interesting thing. I mean, it is an aspect of it, and it kind of completes Sherman's storyline, which, if you think about it, in this scene, he does some of the best acting in his character in this movie, because he really, that sense of like almost like he's meeting a rock star, or he's just so excited.
He doesn't finish sentences. He doesn't say search for the search for extraterrestrial. He stops, and then he says, he stops at words, because you're right. He's at the one thing he's spent his whole life looking for is right in front of him.
Right, and then it's almost like this is exactly what he wanted to hear. Is that, that even this outside, society or extraterrestrial sees the value in humanity. But so there's that going on in the movie. So I think this scene had to happen because we had to kind of resolve that sort of plot line that, humans tend to be really aggressive. And it's interesting how I like the fact that he mentioned there's other civilizations that were very intelligent, but he used the word, did he use brutal? Or
savage. Yeah, so
savage.
Intelligent but savage. Yeah.
Yeah. So savage denotates it's the opposite of civilized, like you mentioned before. Right. And obviously, that term has been used against, indigenous persons or people of First Nations here in the United States to describe, uncultured, uneducated. So I think, so you might wonder. I didn't take it as that, though. I didn't take it as this is like an elitist or white supremacist alien. I took it as more of just talking about how rare it is to find a mix of, an intelligent species who also exhibits compassion. And I think that's what they were trying to get across with that dialogue. And I think that goes into the whole Jenny theme. But man, you're like, wait, this is a Carpenter movie. You're like, wait, John Carpenter is directing this. Like you said, was he sick that day? He didn't write it. He's directing it. And like we said, he wanted to show that he could make a blockbuster. He could make a movie like this that has mass appeal. But clearly the themes are not the themes that he would explore in his writing. Yeah,
the moments where the script deviates from what he seems to truly believe stick out. It makes them very, very evident. So Sherman basically diverts the police by saying that they're not the people they're looking for, and that works. Right. So,
every time
on the one hand, you sit there and go, well, they couldn't just drive to the crater, and yet they basically stop off for a quick meal and then drive to the crater because Sherman allows them to drive to the crater. So they get to the crater, and right on cue, the giant spaceship, apparently because they got there exactly when the ship was arriving, or I guess he sent a beacon or something. Maybe we just didn't see it, but the ship arrives, and we see this massive ship that shows up at this crater to pick him up, and then we basically get the end dialogue of the movie, including some of the theme, and I'm going to play that, and then we'll talk about what was said there. Here we go.
I must go.
Take me with you.
I cannot.
Please.
You will die there.
I don't think I care.
I care. Now, tell me again how to say goodbye.
Kiss me. And tell me you love me.
I love you.
I'm never gonna see you again, am I?
No.
I love you.
Tell the baby about me.
I will. What should I do with this?
The baby will know. Goodbye, Jenny Hayden.
Goodbye.
Man.
Yeah. And we should say visually too. So it's a little sappy, it's a little romantic, but we should say though visually it's probably one of the most striking parts of the film. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And there's this snow falling, there's this really red light. So it really is a beautiful scene. I feel like the whole tell the baby, I feel like this could have been very, very subtle, and it could have just been a way to say goodbye, right? And I think there was just a little bit too much dialogue. And we just read that there was a spin-off series, Starman or something. So is that with the child or something like that, or the baby? So that's not. Let's not go there. But I feel like in general, this film, in a lot of these scenes, there was some extra dialogue that got a little bit campy and made it feel really of the time, of the 80s, and kind of, really overly sentimental. But I feel like this movie, we talk about reboots and how much, maybe we like them, we don't like them. Some we love, some we don't. I feel like a movie that could be remade would be this one, because I think you could do it in you could make it very much less a science fiction film and make it more about a relationship Still having, you know, the alien component in it, maybe not the, you know, the intergalactic baby, but yeah, I think you could do it in a much more subtle way. And I think there has been films that have been about a, you know, relationship with an alien. A couple of films come to mind. But you can't take away from just like kind of the breathtaking visuals at this point and sort of that big budget, sort of big finale, big finish. So I think in that case, you know, it's really well executed.
Yeah, I agree about the remake potential. This could easily be remade and probably improved. Not from, I think the weakness of this movie is the script at times. Sort of in the same way that Halloween 3 has these creaky moments, although they're much worse. They're much lowers,
yes.
but then the ending is completely solid, so it's a little different that way.
Yes.
But with this one, there are those moments where there's, and it's funny because this is one of many, in several of these clips, there's a duality to the dialogue where there is the really bad elements and then there's these exceptional elements. This thing where she says, where he says, "You'll die," and she says, "I don't think I'd care." The way that's delivered is that she knows deep down that she does not love him. This is not the alien. She loves the memory of her husband. This is essentially when somebody says, "What I wouldn't give for another day or another week with a person that I lost." That's what this is. She knows that she's not going to go with him. That's why when she says, "I don't think I'd care," if she the way it's written is very specific. The way you write that from a person who truly believes is, I don't care. Not, "I don't think I'd care." It doesn't sound that different. It is that different. There's a difference there. And earlier when she was in the car and she says, you know, "You still want to go back, right?" There is an element to that where she's hoping he doesn't say no. She wants him to, she knows he has to leave, but she's asking because that's the way the relationship is. It's the natural thing to say was, "Well, do you want to stay?" But the way it's phrased and the way she delivers is, "Well, I hope you don't say yes because, you know, this can't really work. You can't stay here. You know, no, there's an alien." She knows that.
I think the writer at this point is trying to do a summary of the movie, and I think he's trying to do it there, or the two of them, and there was a third uncredited rewriter. I think they're trying to go 360 through the movie. So when she says, "I don't think I would care," she's back to the start of the movie where she's drinking wine, taking pills, and watching the home movies, you know, where she's just basically not really moving on, not really like moving on with her life, and just kind of in that state of grief. And then, you know, it kind of twists and turns and she has this baby now to live for, which is a little hokey, but like there's this hope then at the end. So I think like it's almost like at the last scene, like, you know, you're almost like, is she almost suicidal? Like, is she really just lost her sort of will to live? And she kind of almost wants to go back at that point, like go back to the mental state she was at the start of the movie. And he kind of reminds her that's like, no, you've gone through this whole experience now. You should be further along in this grieving process. So I think the dialogue's a little cheesy, but you're right. You know, within the really timely and kind of cheesy lines, there's just this really deep kind of meaning. And like I said, I feel like a rewrite or two and just kind of a more subtle version would be, I think would make this movie go from being a good movie, which I think it is. I think it's a good movie, to being something really sort of unforgettable.
Yeah, and even just slightly different choices in the way that, you know, certain thing, like the thing about, you know, "Tell the baby about me." You know, you don't really need that.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and people don't talk that way to each other. Like
no. It would be something more along the lines of, you know, "I'll never forget you," and he just touches her stomach and says, "I know you won't." And you know, that's it. That's all we need. You don't need "Tell the baby about me." And by the way, here's a magic ball that he'll be able to use when he's like, that feels like we're planting like you said, a series or sequel. That's completely not needed at all. And the shame of that is, it muddies a bit what otherwise is a visually stunning, along with the music sweeping up. I mean, it just looks magnificent. And I do like the fact that then it just ends. There is no more. They don't bother after that. He leaves and the movie is over with. We don't
Right.
need to see her kind of walking back with a smile. Oh, I'll always and a voiceover. I'll always remember those 3 days where the alien gave me back my sense of a will to live. Like that's what.
What are you doing? Are you doing like the Titanic movie here or whatever?
Pretty
Like
much,
that? I remember when I was younger.
And when I look at my child now, I see in the back of his eyes that alien
Right.
that drove me across the
Yeah.
country and saved me from a bullet when the damn cop shot me. You know, it's like, okay.
Yeah, well, let's hope we're not responsible for making the remake because I feel like we would destroy the film.
Yeah, that might not be
I have
the
a
best
question, though. If there was a remake, though, would you keep the same amount of helicopters in that final scene, or would you add
Oh, you
even
gotta have the
more
choppers.
to the
No,
ridiculous amount of choppers?
need-
There was
listen,
like way too
No,
many
no.
choppers at the end of that
look,
movie.
You have to set it out in the ocean so that we can have a couple of Nimitz level aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
You know, I want to have a Harrier. You know, this has
Yeah.
to be an international effort. Everybody has to come kill the alien. You know, there should be a tug of war on his body after they shoot him to death where they're all pulling on different parts. No, you got to go all out. You got to do it.
Here's the thing. So we talked about budget, right? So we talked about, what brings the budget up here. We said, the movie cost $24 million, right? Yeah, the movie cost 24. It only made 28. I bet you could have done it for 22, maybe even 20 by just cutting out the excessive amount of helicopters that are in that final scene.
You mentioned the expensive helicopters in our first part about
Well, and that's why I
cost.
mentioned it. That's why I mentioned it, because I feel like in that film, that was the appropriate amount of helicopters. Once again, talking about how much I really appreciate Escape from New York and what a lean and what a kind of really tight film that was.
Efficient.
Yes, efficient. This felt just like, hey man, we got a big budget here. Let's fly some of these helicopters around.
Yeah, that does stick out as just almost it's almost a parody. It's almost like Carpenter wanted, where they were like, okay, can we get rid of the helicopters? No, John, we have to have the helicopters. Okay, well then I need 20 helicopters. If we're gonna do something stupid, then I'm gonna overstoop it and spend your money on it. Let's get 20 choppers. Come on.
Well, I think the idea was to make it a big scene where like the world is watching type. Just like in Halloween 3 when they showed the children trick-or-treating in all the different places in America to kind of be like, dude, there's like a lot of kids that are participating in this mask event. So I think that was like a plot device or a script device to kind of show,
it is, but
the greatness of the scene.
As you pointed out, though, it just again underscores how unnecessary that part of the movie is. That whole larger thing with the it's all completely just flotsam and jetsam. It doesn't matter. It's not important. It doesn't really add anything except that the audience expects something like this in a movie like this, even though this is a movie where they should be looking at it going, oh, wait, this isn't that type of movie, but you still have to have it because that's the expectation. But every time it shows up, either through the way it's written or through what we see, it just seems ridiculous and it just seems completely overblown and unnecessary. So, however, you could say that makes the quieter moments land better, I guess. So the contrast maybe helps. Maybe it is that you appreciate it more when you remember, oh wait, it wasn't that there was a helicopter shootout. It was that these two people sat in a restaurant and she tried to explain death to him and it was so terrible for her she couldn't make it through it. Oh yeah, maybe that's what I should remember.
So give me half the budget, an eighth of the budget, and just have these road scenes, and then just hint at the idea that the military is on their tail, and I feel like that would be enough to sustain the entire movie and kind of keep the interest, and also really just focus on the characters and their kind of growing relationship.
Hey, Bill Bixby did it for how many years with the Incredible Hulk, right? That's the
and a lot of green paint
and
a lot of green paint.
Around,
Yeah.
Once in a while, they got a giant guy to show up in green paint, but that's not what most people actually care about in that show. It's Bill Bixby helping people out. So
absolutely. And so, what do you think? So, should we real quickly here watch the entire first season of Starman, the series, the 1986 series, and give our take on it? I'm kidding.
Listen, you joke, but what you don't know is that on our normal show, this is the kind of thing I actually do, is I will go and find the most obscure garbage piece of crap and try to figure out if there's anything good about it. So we may not do it for this series, but I will at least watch the pilot episode maybe before we do our next recording and report back on if there is anything of worth in it.
I'll tell you this. If you watch the pilot episode, report back to me. I will watch it as well. If you watch it. So what is this, an hour or 45 minutes or 42 minutes of my time?
Yeah, probably.
If it can be found.
If it can be, well, destroyed. I guarantee Starman TV series. Let's just look really quick.
We have the internet.
Is it on? Is it on YouTube? Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, it's Ted Stryker as Starman. Oh man. Oh, you got to be kidding! Yeah, from Airplane. Yeah, he has a drinking problem.
That's not good. That's not a good sign, man.
No.
That's
that might be very good. That might be. Yeah, there are multiple episodes.
Wow.
And
no Karen Allen. No Karen Allen, but I guess
no Karen Allen to be found. Did anybody from the movie show up? No.
Do
nobody.
We know? Yeah, because those were all A-list actors.
Oh
at the time,
no, the son is in it. Oh, now I have to watch it.
Yeah. See, that's what I knew. No. Yeah, this is not good. This is not. Remember how we were complaining about reboots in current time and saying how bad reboots in our current time? That was happening in the 80s. So it was the best of times, and there was some bad stuff going on then too. So.
Oh, but he's a different character. He's a different Starman. Oh, I have to watch this.
Oh, it's like a different Starman?
Yeah. He's playing a different character who has a hedonistic past. Oh, God.
Absolutely.
Oh, God.
A hedonistic past.
Yes. Now, as regular listeners will know, now I have to watch it. So now this is catnip for me. Is garbage series. Okay, I got. Yeah. Oh, God, it's Ted Stryker in a Starman show. Oh, my good grief.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, maybe. There is no better / worse way to end this particular episode than the fact that Ted Stryker was the Starman on the TV series who apparently slept around a lot, and that's a plot point. Oh, God. Oh.
If you saw Starman, hey, it could have been worse, right? You could have had to watch the Starman series. Yeah.
Please tell me at some point he says, "I put many babies in many women." Why? Is that a problem?
Did you write the script, Joe? Did you write?
You know what? Maybe I did. Maybe when I was very young, they took scraps of paper that my mom wisely threw out and said, "Hey, we can make a show around this, can't we?"
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. Well, we're going to wrap that up here. I will remind everybody again that Doug's album Music for Billionaires is pre-orderable, if that is a phrase. Now, it'll be out on October 27th, so I didn't remind... In our previous episode, I think I had 4 reminders. This time I only had 1, but...
one is good. One is good.
One will work. One at the end, to try to wash that Starman series
taste out of your mouth.
If possible. All right, Doug, well, we're going to come back, and we're going to do this again. We got another set of movies to finish out our Carpenter... I don't know what the word is for a 6... of something, but is it sextology? Is that the word?
Sextuplet or something like that?
Oh, God, we're doing hedonism and babies and sextuplet. Oh, God, this is terrible. Yeah, all right. Well, this has been a blast as always, and we'll come back and do this again. So thanks for tolerating. Oh boy. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again. And I can't even imagine what the next set. Oh God, where are we going to go?
It's going to be good. It's going to be good. One of my favorite films of all time is one of the next films we're going to be talking about. So buckle up.
Yep, the final set is coming, everybody. So get ready. We'll talk to you then. Visit OzoneNightmare.com to subscribe to new episodes or to browse through our back catalog. Follow @Ozone Nightmare on Twitter for the latest episode postings and other show information. If 140 characters just isn't enough, you can always email us, theozonenightmare@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, visit our creator page at patreon.com/Ozone Nightmare. Music for Ozone Late Night is provided by Ogre. Visit ogresound.bandcamp.com to listen and purchase his fantastic selection of music.